Hey guys, um, thank you so much for joining a late night stream. Today, I wanted to just do a little bit of a late night hang, review the atheist debate between Jay Dyer and Gnostic Informant. I thought that this was a good debate, and I kind of had a little bit of time tonight, so I was like, why not just kind of hop up and debate and review something with you guys? Um, so, with that said, um, yeah, I wanted to, especially as we're going towards Lent. Lent is kind of a special time because we're commemorating the time with our Lord, joining with him in the wilderness, like he was in the wilderness, and then ultimately it ending with Good Friday and then Resurrection Sunday, Easter. So a little bit more reflective, but also we're gonna do a little bit of apologetics, see where we're gonna get to. Today is gonna be slightly more philosophically heavy. So if you're not into that, I'll try my best to kind of just explain and follow along as we go. But if you're here, do appreciate the time that you guys are spending with me. Um, with that said, I'm gonna bring up the um, debate that happened between Mr. J. Dyer and um, Gnostic Informant. This happened a few. I believe this happened this week. So this happened like a couple of days ago, and we'll go ahead and bring it up. Um, so these is an atheist versus a Christian debate, and I'm gonna go ahead and pull this up. Share tab audio. There it is. Basically, Jay Dyer and Gnostic kind of go at this by themselves. Um, he's a big atheist. You know, Jay Dyer's Eastern Orthodox. Andrew Wilson, if you don't know, he's an Eastern Orthodox. So they have a fun debate. They have a pretty philosophically heavy debate, and we're gonna be reviewing it with them. So let me just lower the volume a little bit. All right, and then go ahead.
Talk there. So if you like shit talk,
So I'm gonna move it at a fairly fast pace.
you can follow me there too.
That's funny because that's what I do on X. Yeah, it's my
And
favorite things to shit
let's try
post
to
on
see
X.
what the
Anyway,
atheists
ladies and
plan.
gentlemen, without any more ado, I'm going to let Jay go ahead with his opening statement. Jay Dyer, you got 10 minutes on the clock. Go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, I want to start by saying that the argument here is about
Before we even start, it's gonna be probably very heavy, like I said, philosophically, but also I know that Jay's probably gonna use tag. Just letting you know, if you don't like tag, if you don't understand tag, this might be a little bit difficult to follow. But it's a very good apologetic. The way Jay presents it, I thought it was pretty good. At least I just watched parts of it. I'm gonna review the whole thing right now, obviously. Um, let me move this here. There it is. Um, and I thought that he did a good job. Let me try to see if I can pull this aside. I'm trying to work Restream a little bit better so that um we can have a little bit more interaction. So again, Mr. Dyer here is gonna be starting off his opening statement. So we'll go through enough of the debate. I don't like audience questions. We'll go through enough of the debate where they get heated and things like that.
the coherency and the worldview that makes the best sense of reality. And between us, we will be arguing two different paradigms that have radically different accounts of the nature of reality. For my argument, I will be arguing from a divine revelation position that I believe sets forth what I would say is an Orthodox Christian paradigm, namely that the basic fundamentals of a worldview, my worldview, anybody's worldview, would be metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. And those fundamental categories.
So metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. I think he can. When he says epistemology, I think he means the laws of logic. Metaphysics, the thing that grounds reality, and ethics obviously is morality. He sees probably all of these as universal truths, independent of universes, dependent on the nature of God. So that's probably what he's going to go for. Um, with his formulation of tag.
Would point us in the direction of a worldview that makes sense of and gives an account of those things. It just so happens that within the Christian paradigm, specifically the Orthodox Christian paradigm, all of those three elements of philosophy or of a worldview make sense with the God that created this world, that providentially guides this world, that gives this world a telos or a purpose, and has also structured this world with a kind of logos or a logi that is a foundational organizing principle. The Greek philosophers talked about the logos. And if you go back to those Greek philosophers, even all the way back to the pre-Socratics, they spoke about this logos as a universal organizing principle.
So this is actually mentioned even in the New Testament, although the New Testament does attribute logos more to the targums that come about in Jewish culture. The logos, to the idea that Christ is the logos, is not just Christ as logos is not just wisdom, not just word, but also a Greek person would have immediately understood to be the universal guiding principle. The way they put it is the thing for which all things exist, or the thing that by which all things exist. So Christ would be considered that universal logos, and he's going to ground us in Christ. Now, he's going to come at it with the Eastern Orthodox view. I'm not going to come at it from there. I'm going to come from a Reform view, but I'll just assume that we agree on enough without going into energy essence distinctions right now, the distinction right now, and see how far we can ground this.
Other philosophers like Plato or Aristotle talked about the logi or the logos being something that is an explanation or a definition. When we work through these ancient philosophers, we notice that they don't really give much of an explanation other than conflicting amongst themselves as to who or what this actually is. It's fine to say that it's a law, it's a principle, but that doesn't tell us very much. And also it conflicts. The Stoic idea conflicts with later Neoplatonic ideas as to what the logos actually is. The Hebrew wisdom tradition, and I can give many scholars if we
Yeah, the Hebrew wisdom tradition is the Targums. So the Targums are oral sayings of the Old Testament. So essentially, you have the Old Testament, but then you kind of have the Old Testament said in verbal form, and it could be like commentary or sayings. And they're very authoritative. They're not to be taken lightly. They're taken extremely authoritative. In fact, the Apostle John draws from the Targums to say, "In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God." He draws directly from there, so it's an incredibly authoritative source. That's where we get Christ from.
need to here, was not primarily drawing from the Greek ideas. Certainly, Philo and other Jewish scholars were influenced by Hellenism, and they used the terminology of the logos that was coming out of the Septuagint and other translations of the Old Testament text during the 2nd century. But the idea, according to a Hebrew scholar, or excuse me, a biblical scholar, the Orthodox, from the Oxford Guide to the Bible, it notes that the Johannine logos is strongly parallel to the concept of wisdom in Hellenic Jewish thought. But wisdom was already associated with the attribute of God.
So if you look at Greek Orthodox thinking in general, Greek Orthodox thinking, hey, Cheevers, how you doing, brother? How you doing? Hope you're having a good Thursday, Friday morning. Hope everything's good with the family. But if you look at the Greek culture in general, and you read the Cappadocian Fathers, like I can pull this up for you soon, but if you look at, and I probably might as well, if you look at the Cappadocian Fathers, for example, if you look at Saint Basil or Saint Gregory of Nyssa, Saint Gregory of Nyssa, they will all start off the principal reason from being the rational mind, the rational soul, and they'll start off as that as their precondition, the premise by which God is not only that which God created, but also God redeemed. So they see the rational mind and the rational soul as the highest good. So that's something that's just to keep in mind when you're looking at Greek culture, Greek metaphysics in general, is that they start off in different positions than what we might start off with. We usually start off with nature, the nature of God. It could be nature of Scripture, nature, whatever it is. We start off with systematic theology. Systematics start with the Word of God, but Greek thinking always starts with the rational mind, the logos or the logi. It always starts there, and we can even see that in Christian writings. And I'll bring up some Christian writers who say the same thing.
Wisdom of Solomon 9:1-2. In the Hebrew Bible, the word of God is both creative and active, Genesis 1 and Isaiah 55:10-11. And in Greek, logos meant spoken word or pervading principle. Stoic philosophy saw this as the guiding meaning or layer that ordered the universe. However, this meaning is not a direct background for John's logos that was already drawn out of, as we're saying, the Hebrew wisdom tradition. In Genesis 1, we have God's word there present as an active means by which the world comes to be. As we progress throughout the Torah, and we're going to probably get to that later, I'm going to stick to the Torah, although there's many examples in the Psalms and the minor prophets and historical books. There's many examples of this voice, this angel, this form, this theophany, having a personality, being distinct from Yahweh, but also being Yahweh, also being divine, also having the same characteristics to redeem, to save, etc. The reason this is important is that, as I understand, he tends to argue, my opponent, that the idea of the Trinity, these ideas are cribbed from Greek philosophers. They don't exist in the first centuries of Christianity, I've heard him claim. Well, I'm ready.
So this is absolutely false. So I'm going to bring up as we go through this, I'll actually bring up Christian thinking on this as well. So I'll bring up the tab since there's no one else with me. I will bring up the tab with Greek thinking. But if you look at, for example, this is Saint Gregory of Nyssa, and I was reading this um, this week. When you look at, for example, on the making of man, right? When you look at the body, this is his very beginning. The body is fitted to be the instrument of the mind, and then adapted to be the use of a reasonable being. So when you look at Greek thinking in general, and this is why even when you're discussing things like original sin with the East, they won't accept it because their view is all starts with this concept of the rational soul, the rational mind, right? And so everything starts with the logos. Everything starts with your mind as the fundamental reason why for which you exist, and that is the fundamental good, and that's the beauty to which you when you fell, your mind also fell, and then God is restoring your mind. So that, I'm probably overdoing it a little bit, but I'm just kind of setting the context.
To counter all of those claims, and we'll get to those later, but there's about 20 pre-Nicene references that I have amongst dozens more ready to go to prove that no, in fact, the early church fathers, the first, second, and third century, were consistent, not just with the New Testament passages about the deity of Christ and the Trinity. For example, in the Gospel of John, every chapter refers to either the deity of Christ or to the triad. And some passages have both in that chapter. And that's in continuity with the Old Testament, where you have all of these Old Testament passages, again, not just in the Torah, but we're going to focus on the Torah when we get to that in some of the rebuttals. The point there is that the Bible teaches this God, this theology, Old and New Testament. It's not cribbed from the Greeks, even though there's similar terminology. The terminology of logos that I have is really dependent upon the system and the person using it. So, for example, logos used by Marcus Aurelius, as it comes up in his Meditations, is all over the place in what it means. It's a universal guiding principle. It's something innate within him. It's all reality. It's a pantheistic conception. It's the embodiment of the Roman Empire itself. So it's so elastic as to be almost everything and nothing. And that's really nothing in common with what John is doing in John 1 when he argues that the logos is actually the parallel to the voice of Genesis 1. John 1 is a parallel to Genesis 1. Genesis 1 is a creation of the world and created light. John 1 is a parallel that plays on that with uncreated light and the person of the logos identified as the second person of the Godhead. But I want to go back to philosophy for a second, because what's really at root between he and I will be conflicting and competing worldviews. What I laid out is the revelational position of my theology in general and some of the sources and texts. I understand that he doesn't believe these texts, and many of the audience don't believe the text. And when we have competing ideas about the text, that means we have to go to other areas where we find common authority or common ground. That would be the realm of debate. Debate functions around principles like logic, the laws of logic, the three.
So he's just basically saying that in order for us to have this conversation, in order for us and an atheist to have this conversation, we need to be able to ground this in a worldview that makes sense. Either one we can share with another, or another one that we can either kind of cause an ad absurdum about. We can, cause an absurdity in the other worldview. And I think Jay Dyer is probably going to go to your worldview. The atheistic worldview is going to cause absurdity.
Basic laws, excluded middle, non-contradiction, law of identity. Those basic laws lay out how we would argue and then suss out contradictions between worldviews. If his worldview is unable to give a fundamental account of those three basic areas of philosophy, epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics, then it's going to be undercutting his ability even to debate. So that he showed up shows that he has to recognize the laws of thought, critical thinking, or to not engage in fallacious reasoning. And we're going to be having to pay a lot of attention to make sure that he doesn't engage in and rely on a lot of fallacious argumentation. Now, how do I get from what I'm arguing to my Christian conception? Well, as I said, if the world was created by God and it's the God that I'm arguing for, then it would make sense why there's regularity in nature, because God is providential. He providentially guides.
Tag relies really heavily on uniformity and reliability. I think it's actually a weaker proposition than Tag presents it to be. It's kind of easy to defeat that if you're if you know what you're doing. But it is not a bad place. It's just not the most efficient place, in my opinion, to start, because uniformity and regularity of nature can be changed by God at any given moment. So that's sort of a it's like a premise. It's okay. It's an expectation, but it's not a guarantee. You know what I mean? So God can obviously cause a miracle, and he does that all the time in the New Testament.
It's history.
And the Old Testament.
History has meaning. History is not something to flee from as if we were a Gnostic or perhaps even a Neoplatonist, to try to return to the one or whatever his view might be. It's not something to go away from. It's actually a good thing. So history, reality itself is fundamentally declared to be good. And it's good because it has this logos organizing and structuring principle within it. It's not identical to the world. And we're going to see, I think, many fallacies and kill shots with his position of priority monism. And that's compared to a position where we don't have priority monism or any of these weird ideas about metaphysics with no justification. We have justification for the idea of an external world, for the idea of regularity in nature, the idea of objective ethics, because we're made in the image of a good God, a holy God, who has a requirement, a law of the 10 Commandments, of how we ought to live.
2 minutes, Jay.
In the position of Neoplatonism or in the position of priority monism, we're going to notice that there's no real basis for good and evil. In fact, we might argue, or we might ask, does evil have ontological existence in a situation where all things are essentially parts of the one? We might ask, why would we prioritize one over many? And we're going to see, I think, that when he answers those types of questions, it relies on unjustified assumptions. That's why epistemology has to come into play. We have to figure out what are the justifications for the assertions that we have, and do we have good reasons for our beliefs? Not just any old reasons, but good reasons. So I'm going to argue that the logos, this personal God that we have a relationship with, who's not just a unknown Unitarian, far-off Platonic idea or monad, but is a personal God who has a relationship with us, that gives us ethics, that gives us life and meaning, and gives us an end goal, a purpose.
He went for the monad. He went for the monad, didn't he? When I was in college, we had to memorize all of these because we had to make arguments from them. So when we studied discrete mathematics, we took discrete mathematics, we had to study all these rules of inference. And whenever someone makes an argument, my mind today naturally does this to just make sure that it's following proper logical form. Once you can boil down, by the way, if you can boil down any argument to a bunch of statements like this, it's really easy to it's like logic becomes way easier once you can actually understand logic. So this class, Discrete Mathematics 1, or Discrete Mathematics, is a lifesaver. Like, it literally has changed the way I view the world. So there's a massive amount of education that I find valuable in this. And if you understand just these basic principles, these are not like crazy amounts of principles. You can make truth tables essentially out of these. But if you can understand basic to these, you can make an incredible amount of progress. Like almost all proofs are just based on these little principles here. But yeah, like when Jay's making this, I would prefer that he sticks to something like a formal, logical, syllogistic form, but I don't think he's going to. It's not a bad approach, but it's just when you make a logical argument, it's irrefutable. You know what I mean? It's just, you can't refute it.
Has intentionality. Even within the Neoplatonic conception or the monist conception, it's hard to figure out exactly why an immaterial one or an immaterial universal impersonal force or principle would in any way give us purpose or telos in a grand scheme. In fact, all of reality is sort of an eternal generation, if you follow the Neoplatonist argumentation. Maybe he doesn't, we'll have to see. But regardless, there's going to be many fundamental problems that aren't fundamental problems in a Christian paradigm. His paradigm will be totally different and undercut the possibility, not just of his metaphysical speculations, but reality itself and knowing reality itself. Again, having a justified true belief about reality that you can make sense of without relying upon, this is what I feel, bro. This is the easiest answer. It's parsimonious. All of those things are unjustified reasons and assumptions as to why his worldview should be true, when really what's at stake here is which worldview can give an account for the preconditions and the possibilities of knowledge, ethics, and metaphysics.
Now, if I were to guess, the atheist is going to go with some sort of an empirical argument, like some sort of empiricism. Either they go for positivism or empiricism or something like that. Empiricism is just, I need to go collect data and science, and I need to go verify the world with empirical means, through empirical means. So I'm going to assume he's going to do something like that, but we'll see what he does. I don't know. I've never seen Gnostic Informant other than the fact that I just saw his channel, a couple of days ago.
All right, and that's time. Right on time, in fact. Just want to point out, over 5,000 on YouTube, 7,000 between all platforms. Appreciate all of you guys coming in this evening to watch this debate. Gnostic Informant, you have 10 minutes on the clock. Go ahead when you're ready.
So I guess I heard some arguments there of why his worldview is coherent and accounts for these things. Like he said, the logos is personal. There's a few things in there, but mostly what I heard was, my opponent needs to do this, needs to do this, needs to do this, needs to do this, worrying about what I'm going to say, when that should be for the next round. You should be giving an argument for your worldview, which I'll be doing right now. My worldview, which I call Apologist monism, it's metaphysically priority monism. And I'll explain why I call it Apologist monism in a second, It is basically priority monism as described by the Neoplatonist philosophers. So it's starting off with it's called the hierarchical hypostasis. The one, the good, is the arche, the beginning. It's all perfect, all knowing, all powerful. And
So he's like a deist, basically. Is that right? He's a monad. That's funny. He believes in a monad, so he believes that everything boils down to a single reality, essentially. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see what this guy's. I never seen that. I thought this guy was an atheist. But we'll see.
One emanates from this, the nous, which is represented in different ways by different philosophers. I use Apollo because Apollo is form.
So nous, like, he's literally a Greek Gnostic. He's okay, fine.
Intellect, logos, reason, perfection, the sun. We can use the sun as an example of the brightest light that we can see in our present world right now. It also gives off the most radiation, heat, and life sustaining. Doesn't mean I believe the sun is the monad. It's a representation. It's a model that we can use to sort of explain the metaphysics. And then also there's a triad at play, because the next emanation, which is the first emanation, which is the nous, is the brightest emanation. It's almost identical to the one itself. It's the closest thing you're going to get from perfection. The third emanation is psyche, or soul. And this is the mediator between all the numbers that come after, all the plurality that comes after. The mediator between the physical and sensible, emotions and feelings. I use Dionysus as a way to describe the whirling of the cosmos. And from this triad, emanations go all the way down to the physical world of matter. And the farther away you get from the one, the less good there is. Evil persists in this realm.
I have literally never seen a Gnostic before. This is funny. Okay, all right, this is interesting.
Humans are at the top of the lowest realm, but our main objective is to climb the ladder to get back to the good. So I'm just giving basic. That's just a basic understanding of. You can ask me whatever you want if you want to go deeper into it, but it accounts for all things, because it accounts for the laws of logic. It accounts for particulars. It accounts for universals, all the things that you asked for. Now, it accounts for the one and many too, because the emanations allow for the plurality to be distinct, but also have the essence of the one. So even down to the lowest form of life, there's a little bit of essence of the one within it. It doesn't mean that you and I are the same, that I'm literally your ear or I'm literally your finger. We are distinct, but we all come from the emanations of the one. That's what solves the one and the many. It's a metaphysical argument, just like you would say the Trinity is what accounts for that. Now, I think your worldview is incoherent. My worldview isn't, because my worldview doesn't have contradictions. My worldview allows for things like empiricism. And modern Platonists today actually accept evolution, and we accept the age of the earth because of empiricism. You can even go back and read Aristotle, who is not an evolutionist.
What does that have to do with anything? Okay, you accept empiricism. Like, what? Do Christians not accept empiricism? Well, empiricism, not just empirical thought. Like, he's talking about empiricism, like the literal school of, verifying everything through empirical means. That's different. No, we should not accept that. Like, we should not accept it at the extreme level, but just using empirical means to verify the world around us. Yeah, of course, that's science. We should all be doing that.
But you can see he got close because of his empiricist mindset, because of his discovery of the laws of logic. He got very close. And I actually have a passage from Aristotle that I had got ready from Lowe, where he says nature, this is from History of Animals. He says nature proceeds from the inanimate to the, I got to sign back in. It signed me out. Damn.
That's an F-, Neil.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's F-, Neil.
I got signed out of Lowe.
Neil. You gotta keep it flowing.
I got clocked out of Lowe. That sucks. I can't find it now. Well, okay, whatever. I don't have to say. You guys can look it up on Animals. He says basically I'll just describe what he says. I'll just paraphrase it. He says that when you look at animals, you can almost see types going into other types. There's almost like a blend of different types of animals. Like there's different types of horses and different types of fish, and there's like a gradient line. And he gets close to almost understanding that there's an evolution going on, but he doesn't get that far. And a lot of modern Platonists think that if he would have been around today and saw the evidence of, like, when we find fossils, he would have said, oh shit, there's transitional fossils. Things like atoms, by the way. I thought this was the defeater for Platonism, and that's actually not. Werner Heisenberg
Hey, Guy, how you doing, brother? I know. You know, I understand. I thought this was a good debate.
Who is the one who discovered the law of uncertainty, he actually argues that when you smash atoms together, under the atomist Epicurean view, Democritus view, they should get smaller and break apart. But what happens when you smash atoms together is they actually form mathematical symmetries, which is forms. So it actually favors the Platonist view more. So those type of things is why I started to become convinced by this worldview. So I'm just kind of laying this out for a little bit. But another thing I want to stress is the concept that Plato talks about is apory. So Plato in his dialogues, if you read Plato's dialogues, you know they never end on a solution. Socrates is always the best debater, but he never really wins the debate. It's always left off on like they don't really know like we get close to it, but things have to stay open. We need to have that scientific mind that we could be wrong. That's just me completely coming to you honestly. I don't have to know all things. I am a not.
What does this have to do with anything? Okay, the scientific mind, but what does this have to do with anything? It makes no sense. Like, what he just jumped from. My worldview is, follows the line of thinking that would be validated by what Plato said, and then he went down into he talked about the noose a little bit, which, by the way, the noose, if you don't know, where else do you find that is, Eastern theology, right? This is a rational mind, rational soul, and he just went into, oh, but we also should affirm science. He just jumped from like this thing to an atheistic script. I don't know why he did that.
Being, however, with using empiricism, laws of logic, not going against the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, the scientific method, I can know things, and we can see that Aristotle discovered the laws of logic thousands of years ago, and they still stand up today. So we can know things almost to a certainty, but the only dogma that a Platonist should hold is virtue. If you are doing things that are breeding virtue, they are good, and you should do them. If you are doing things that are not bringing virtue, you shouldn't do them.
Okay, so like he's going to ground morality into virtue, just like the Greeks tried to. That's how the Greeks pretty much argued about everything. Is everything boils down to virtue, and that's the purpose of life.
That's the main dogma that a Platonist holds, rather than having faith. So it is a gnosis versus faith paradigm. We are disagreeing on that, but I would argue that how do we know God? So you might ask that question. How do I know God? Well, through negation. What God not is. God doesn't contradict himself.
What not God is. Not God not is. But yeah. Nitpick.
For example, God doesn't tell you
also, you literally can't negate God, no matter how hard you try. So if you put the qualifier of God and you try to negate it, you will. And Jay, if he's really paying attention, he'll make that point. If you negate God, you will negate all of the things that flow down from God, which then rules out the ability to negate anything, right? Like if you negate, it's like saying, what if we negate the universe and then the universe just ceases to exist, right? So he's like, oh, pretend the universe doesn't exist, and then reason from there. It's not as logical. You can make that statement in words, but it doesn't make sense in reality.
Through his scripture, for example, I have Numbers here. He doesn't tell you that he wants to abort babies, and then thousands of years later, one of the main dogmas of the church is like no abortions. So in the book of Numbers, you have Yahweh telling.
I wonder if this kind of Greek stuff that makes them Trinity deniers almost reflects at least a. Yeah, right. Yeah, like you're talking about like oneness people that say Plato. I mean, I would argue that the fathers, when they try to defend the Trinity, they actually they don't come from this like very deep Platonistic place. They are actually harmonizing scripture with some of these categories that are here. That's what I would say. If just reading the fathers, I know that's what they're trying to do. They're not trying to like reason from just the bare bones. I don't think you can reason to the Trinity like that. The Trinity is an impossible position to reason to if you try to just reason to it.
The high priest that if you suspect there's any, this is Numbers 5:11-31. If you suspect that a woman is being an adulterer, that you should make this potion, this water from the dust of the tabernacle, and give it to her, and then put a curse on her so that the baby in the abdomen will swell and the womb miscarries. then the woman is to say, amen, so be it. So that's a contradiction in your worldview. You have your own God telling your priest to do abortions, but you say you're anti. Water from the dust of the tabernacle. So in the book of Numbers, you have Yahweh telling the high priest that if you suspect there's any, this is Numbers 5, 11, 31.
Oh, I've been talking about it and I've been muted the whole time. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. Okay, let me just read it back. I apologize. I do apologize about that. The man shall bring his wife to a priest and shall bring as an offering for her a tenth of an ephah of barley meal. He shall not pour oil on it nor frankincense on it, because it is a grain offering of jealousy, a grain offering of reminder, a reminder of wrongdoing. Okay. Oh, okay. So he's probably over here, right? He's probably over here. He shall make the woman drink the water of bitterness. So whatever water that he's made her drink, he shall drink a water of bitterness, and the priest shall take a grain offering of jealousy from the woman's hand, and he shall wave the grain offering before the Lord and bring it to an altar, and the priest shall take a handful of the grain offering as a reminder and offer it up on the altar. Okay. When he has made her drink the water, then it shall come about, if she has defiled herself. Okay, if she has defiled herself and has been unfaithful to her husband, that her water will bring a curse, brings a curse, will go into her, cause bitterness. Her belly will swell up, and her thigh will shrivel, and the woman will become a curse among her people. But if a woman has not defiled herself and is clean, she'll be immune and conceive children. This almost seems like, okay. I think you guys can hear me now, right? This almost seems like this would be. I actually don't know what exactly this is. If you guys have any context to this, I would love to know. But this almost seems like this is like once a woman has had relations with a man, it seems like it would be something that's, this is something that causes a reaction. I don't know if this causes a unaliving of a baby. I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it almost seems like this was some sort of a thing that would cause a reaction if a woman has had a relations with a man. I mean, that's what it seems like it's doing. And yeah, you said John Calvin is evil. Well, we are all evil, aren't we? Are we not all evil? Okay. I don't know. I don't know that I could rule this completely to be an unaliving of a baby, but this seems more so to mean that, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's something that causes some sort of reaction in the woman. Okay.
If you suspect that a woman is being an adulterer, that you should make this potion, this water from the
Yeah. I didn't see anything with the baby involved other than the second part saying she would be able to conceive, but I don't know.
dust of the tabernacle and give it to her, and then put a curse on her so that the baby in the abdomen will swell and the womb miscarries. Then the woman is to say, amen, so be it. So that's a contradiction in your worldview. You have your own God telling your priest to do abortions, but you say you're anti-abortion. Here's some more. Premise 1. A perfect self-sustained being lacks nothing and does not require appeasement. The biblical
A perfect being does not require appeasement. Okay.
God commands sacrifices to atone for sins. Requiring sacrifice implies a need for appeasement or satisfaction. Conclusion. Therefore, Yahweh is not a perfect, all-sustained being. Not only that, he requires human sacrifice.
That's like the most, I'm sorry, but people who write proofs know that that's a terrible way to write a proof. And the people who write proofs don't write proofs like that. But whatever, we're just going to let it go. Remember when I showed you guys this rules of inference, and I showed you that, you could boil down any argument down into rules, some of these forms. I don't know why. That's not the way you write an argument, but I don't even think that logically follows. I don't even think that logically follows. You guys can check on that. But just my hunch just goes, I don't even think that follows.
Sacrifice. In the book of Judges, Jephthah tells the Lord, he says, if you let me win this battle, the next person you put in front of me, I will put on an altar and sacrifice him to you. What does God put in front of Jephthah after he wins the battle? His prepubescent daughter, who's a virgin. And they go on with the sacrifice.
But God never, that's not a command God gave. His daughter just goes in front of him and he just decides, oh yeah, I'm going to go sacrifice the daughter. But that's not a thing. That's the book of Judges. People do weird stuff in the book of Judges. God doesn't command that.
Sacrifice and do it. It's not like the Abraham story where Abraham's tested and at the last second the angel stops him. Jephthah actually sacrifices a human to Yahweh. This is seen as good. Yom Kippur, Leviticus 16 says that you can sacrifice goats and bulls for sins every year at the time of Yom Kippur. So what happened? Did God change his mind and say, wait a minute, we don't no more Yom Kippur. We need a human. Actually, I'll send myself, a person of myself, who's literally God. I'll put him in human form to sacrifice him to myself so I can save all you guys.
Yeah, he didn't. That wasn't commanded
from me. It doesn't make any sense. It's not logically coherent. So a perfect being cannot.
You said Servetus did not deserve execution. Well, I mean, at the time, the Imperials. I mean, the laws during that time was that the Imperials would execute any heretic. Should Calvin have gotten rid of that? I mean, yeah, eventually by our standards, that's 100% correct. Calvin tried his best to change the mind of Servetus. Servetus was an obstinate anti-Trinitarian and denied the eternal sonship. Now, if we look at it from our perspective and say, oh yeah, like we should never put anyone, we should never unalive anyone for, having a different religious belief. That comes post America, religious freedom, and those kinds of things, right? But at a certain time in history, that wasn't the case. If you're going to judge him by that, I mean, I don't know if you're Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, if you're a Protestant, I don't know what you are. If you're going to judge someone like that, then like every single person that you believe in will fall down by some standard for sure. Whoever it is, they will fall. Even you, 200, 300, 400 years later, will fall by some standard. I promise you. Yeah.
Experience emotional states that imply
you gotta wrap it there, Neil.
Security, last one, or relative change. Premise 2. The Bible attributes jealousy, repentance, and wrath to Yahweh. Therefore, Yahweh is inconsistent with divine perfection.
Okay. Now, gentlemen, I've always given people this option.
It's not a good argument, because if you guys don't know the ontological argument, even if you make the ontological argument, whatever God is, that is the highest good. And you can just define it like that. So it's not a great argument, in my opinion.
After they get past opening statements. If you want to keep the format, get into rebuttals and then get into closings before we open it up, we can do that. Or we can open it up right now, which will give you an extra 45 minutes of open debate. It's up to you guys. What do you want to do there?
Keep going. Back and forth.
Okay. Awesome. 10 minutes then, Jay, for your rebuttal. Go ahead when you're ready.
Just a second here, yeah. Okay. So we heard a whole lot of list of ideas, almost like he just sort of spat out all the things that just popped into his head with little to no actual refutation or argumentation about anything in the Christian paradigm, other than perhaps going to Reddit and finding a few of the classic misunderstandings of anthropomorphic language. The argument
is that not true? Is that not true? Like, he just probably went into some sort of, let me find some things that I find offensive and then rule it out at that point. I don't know if you guys have seen this. Have you guys ever seen the have you guys ever seen the Skeptics Annotated Bible? I actually went through this a long time ago. This website, I actually think it was a different website at the time I went through it. But you could go through like every single book, and you have I don't know, uh people complaining about like the atheists complaining about some law. I don't know, maybe you can go to like Exodus or something, and you go into law of, slavery or something like that, and um you'll find like someone complaining about this law. So I actually went through a lot of this, and um I went through and tried to see what these guys will say. Yeah, they'll put like these little symbols next to them. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before. Um, yeah, it's just a bunch of atheist complaints on the Bible. I don't know why they have that. Um, Peter did not continue to try to cut heads off after he received the fullness of the Holy Spirit. That leads to the question of whether Calvin's conversion was sincere. So Calvin did not end up letting that guy, Servetus, unaliving the guy by his own hands. At the time, the church and the Imperials were working together. And so was he indirectly responsible? Yes, because he ruled against Servetus in a civil magistrate setting. Was it totally outside of what has been the normative practice? No. Do I think it was a good thing? No. That's absolutely not a good thing. But I don't make an excuse for Calvin there. I don't think it's related to his theology. I just don't make an excuse for his behavior there. That should not have happened, but it did. And it's his shortcoming and it's his sin, and he has to answer to God for that. So whether he's saved or not, that's up to God.
That he said I gave no argument was that your worldview is incoherent at a fundamental level such that it makes the possibility of knowledge impossible. You might not like that argument, you might not understand that argument, but that's an argument. That's an internal critique.
He was more similar to the Pharisees. In what way? What do you mean? Because he recommended that Servetus pass? But that was the rule. Like that's the civil law. Like they put to death yeah, they put to death heretics, like the unalived heretics. That was a civil law, and that was how they maintained order at the time. That would be the vast majority of Christians. Is it a good thing? Not at all. I'm not going to make a excuse for that. It's not out of the norm, though. It's like that's what happened at the time.
It's a transcendental argument. He said he's an Apolloist, monist. For him, there is a hierarchical one, a monad, and that there's an emanation from this nous. The nous then produces psyche. There's these gradations. So there's an ontological diminishment in this worldview. He laid out this wild Neoplatonic story. There's this triad. The things at the bottom are less good from the things at the top, which are the highest good. And it's also more perfect. Now, obviously, this is a wild bunch of metaphysics that he claims to want to be in line with modern science and scientific data and information and so forth. And maybe there is some reconciliation there.
He condemned a man to death as they did. Did Christians in the early church do that? No. What do you mean by the early church? Because as soon as Christians pretty much got into power, they started to do all kinds of atrocities. So, I don't know what you're talking about. We have evidence from like what I think 3rd or the 4th centuries of they would burn other Christians. The Trinitarians and the Arians got to war pretty much. Saint Athanasius got exiled by the other bishops. I mean, in the very, very first centuries when Christianity was persecuted, they didn't do that. But as soon as they got into power, they started to do that. So if you're just going to say all of them were not Christians, fine. Skeptics Annotated Bible, that if you want to know like all the atheist complaints on the Bible ever, if you want to know all the Contradictions are all the offensive ones, like offenses or whatever. That's basically what they've just written one, and that's where they get all the sources.
But if you want to appeal to modernity, 99.9% of modern academics, scientists, and all the people that he wants to perhaps appease or be in good cahoots with would laugh at this worldview and would not believe anything remotely close.
Are you an atheist, Alfly3R? Is you're saying that's an atheist? Because atheism is not any better. In fact, atheism would be worse. If you just want to count numbers, atheism would be far worse if that's the case. Islam, same thing. So if you say that there are some Christians who acted very immorally, I will 100% agree with you. I will not make an excuse. But atheists have not done any better in the course of their ruling. And if you just want to look at communist rule, a secular rule where they try to eradicate religion, that has not ended well at all either. It is the nature of people who get into power. It is not about religion or not religion. It's a nature. It's human nature when it gets into power.
To Neoplatonism. Neoplatonism died out in the Middle Ages, in fact, and never really made a resurgence. Now, it has nothing to do with whether it's true or false, but it's just funny to me that there's this desire to want to be rational and academic and scientific when Neoplatonism is anything but. It's one of the most speculative metaphysical disciplines in the history of Western philosophy. Now, he says that the perfection is up at the top with the one, and there's gradations down to the triad and then everything else that comes from the triad. How do we know this? On what basis are we supposed to believe from his worldview, from his paradigm, that there are good reasons to believe in this impersonal monadic generation that's going on? Why would the one, if it's perfect, split into many, which is less perfect? His own argumentation about perfection in Yahweh would apply to his own monad, that the monad wasn't able, it wasn't able to keep it from being many, which then leads to gradations. Think about how silly it is to say that Yahweh doesn't make sense because he did this and this and this in the Old Testament, and that doesn't make sense to me. But then you turn around and say that an impersonal force or one that's aperon, beyond no ability and existence and any predication at all, just split into two.
If you don't know the argument that Jay's making, it's actually a really funny argument. If you understand what he's saying, it's really funny. It's just, it's like, yeah, it's like an impersonal, it's like an impersonal thing just splits by itself. And yeah, if you understand the problem with the one versus the many, what basically that tries to answer is whether nature and reality is basically fundamentally one thing, or is it fundamentally distinct many things. And in order, in the Platonist view, all things are a single substance, but then they split into multiple things, right? They're ultimately one thing. They're just split into multiple things. And he's like, why are they splitting? For what reason? They have no mind or will, and they're just randomly splitting. It's a really funny point.
And then that just split into three. It's just arbitrary assertions from the domain of metaphysics that anyone with an empiricist worldview would laugh at. Neil doesn't know the difference between empirical sense data and empiricism as a school. So that was a huge blunder when he made the conflation between these two things. The gradations of perfections would be laughed at by any modern philosopher, for one, because after the Middle Ages, philosophies and metaphysics of perfection get questioned. They're not believed because there's a Copernican shift in philosophy after human Kant. Why? What does that mean? It means that instead of having metaphysical assumptions and assertions that you make, the question then became, well, how do we know that those assertions and metaphysical things are actually the case? For example, Hume begins to raise questions about the regulator of nature. He raises questions about knowing the external world. Wouldn't you need to know those things before you tell me about ultimate reality and metaphysical gradations and levels beyond reality? Now, in the Christian paradigm, of course, we believe that there are these other realities, but that's because we have a divine being that's outside of time and space that gives us access to that reality. I realize that you don't believe that, but I'm saying we're in a much better position to say how we would think that that's the case, given the fact that we believe in divine revelation. If God exists, he could give revelation about himself in these higher realities or whatever to created beings. But in Neil's paradigm, the one is an impersonal monad. It doesn't do anything with intentionality. So notice there's no purpose actually to our lower bodily reality, even when he says our goal is to get back to the one.
He's going to try to claim a universal mind of some sort. I could see that he's going to do that.
How do we know that? Why? The one is an impersonal aperon, a beyond being, a being beyond being, and beyond that being. That's what the aperon, or the negated existence of the one, actually is. So Neil has a position which is purely theistic and based on faith. He thought that he would come with rationality and reasoning, but his position is completely irrational. In fact, he doesn't even know the difference between empiricism as a school and empirical sense data.
I like that word, fideistic. I don't know if that's a real word, but it's a cool word.
Christians do not reject empirical sense data. In fact, we believe that God created us as beings with minds and with senses to learn things about the natural world. We just simply don't accept the empiricist school, which says that all knowledge comes from sense data. So again, fundamental conflations. Thus, he made another basic mistake by saying that Aristotle was an empiricist. Certainly, Aristotle was more empirical in his methodology than Plato, but he was not an empiricist as we think of the post-Enlightenment philosophers like David Hume or anybody from the positivist schools of philosophy. So he says that we can know these things, and we can know, for example, that there's only one dogma.
Yeah, I don't know how a Platonist escapes the fact. Yeah, you're right, guy. Like, I don't know how they escape the infinite regress that happens by asserting that matter essentially always existed, or whatever, whatever it is, that is the one thing always existed. I don't know how they can come to that conclusion.
Of a Platonist, and that is virtue. How do we know that that's the one dogma? He began his whole argumentation from the most outlandish speculations about the monad and the nous and the psyche. But then he says, but really the only thing we can know from Platonism is the virtue is to be virtuous. How do we know what virtue is if everything is a manifestation of the one? I understand that as a priority monist, he recognizes the reality of particulars and distinctions. But the problem isn't about recognizing distinctions. The problem is, well, what's the difference between good and evil? If all reality is fundamentally one thing, monism, and a manifestation of the one, even if there's gradations, then what is moral evil? In other words, even if Yahweh were guilty of the things that Neil says, well, in Neil's paradigm, everything is just a manifestation of the one anyway. Jeff Sy McEffrey doing all the stuff on his island, that's just a manifestation of the one. It might be a lower manifestation, but it's not an objective evil that one must oppose, because there is no objective standard of good and evil in Neil's paradigm. That's, again, another kill shot, which, again, Christianity, even if you don't like it, at least it makes sense and has a coherent basis to why there would be good and evil. There's a good God. Evil is a negation, a privation, and a moral infraction against that God's commands. So the bad parts of the Bible don't even have any sensibility in his worldview, given that there is no bad. For him, the bad is just non-being. That's the classical chain of being model that we're talking about. But that's not really bad in a moral sense. It just lacks being. Now, for the church fathers, we agree in some places that there is a sense in which evil is a negation. We don't think it has.
Now, this is going to be the interesting part. The interesting part is, as an Eastern theologian or whatever in the Eastern, how do you fully refute this? Now, the West does a good job of introducing concepts like sin and guilt and things like that. But in the East, I don't know how you escape some of this stuff. You kind of have to use that same metaphysical framework in order to come to the same conclusions. All right, Dexter, I got to run, bro, now that you're here. Yeah. The whole impersonal monad thing, I think that this is what the cosmological argument places the importance of identifying. Yeah, right. Exactly. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have rationality and will in and of itself. It doesn't have anything that grounds it, unless now if you make it a personal, which I think is what he's going to argue. I might be wrong. I might be completely wrong. But what I think he's going to argue is there is a will, which would imply a mind to this universal deity.
Ontological existence. But we have a basis for moral evils because of a moral character that God has and tells us not to do these and that, these certain things. And thus we are also imprinted, being made in his image, with a moral sense of good and evil. That is, the law of God is written on our hearts in the Christian paradigm. Now, the passages that he talked about, none of those teach the necessity of human sacrifice. If you read James Jordan's book, James Jordan's famous commentary on the book of Judges, very prominent biblical commentator, he makes a very good argument that when God tells Jephthah to give up his daughter, this is in the tradition of the Jews, just like with Samuel, of committing your firstborn child to go serve at the temple. And this is a known Jewish practice, just like why we believe that Mary was committed to, as a young person, serve at the temple. You had that ability in Judaism to give up your firstborn, or your daughter even as well, to go serve at the temple. And the reason that mattered for the kings at that time was that meant they might not have a male heir through that daughter. So it's not just human sacrifice, because remember, already we've been told in the law of Moses to not have human sacrifice. The point of the story with Abraham is that God will provide the sacrifice, not that he accepts human sacrifice. In fact, Neil misunderstood the anthropomorphic language throughout the Old Testament, and Jews, Christians, Muslims, almost everybody understands that there's anthropomorphic language that's used to give us an idea of what God is like. Doesn't mean that God literally has jealousy, right? He doesn't learn new facts because he's omniscient. but we have words that are used to help us understand this deity. And we actually believe in the theology of negation as well. We think that God's essence is unknowable. We negate what God's essence is, but God's positive cataphatic attributes are the energies that come down to us, as St. Basil says. So we believe in a both and again, for him,
you got to wrap it very quickly, Jay.
The world as it exists has no actual purpose and no actual basis to understand moral good and evil.
Thank you for that rebuttal. Appreciate it very much. Neil, your rebuttal. You have 10 minutes on the clock.
It's funny how you just admitted that you also have the same doctrine of negation to know God, when for the last 10 minutes before that, you're sitting there asking me, how can I know things like God, when it's all, how did he just had this nonsensical way of just speculating, basically. And it's not speculation. It's a metaphysical argument, just like you're putting out there. The only difference is my metaphysical argument doesn't have contradictions like in the Trinity. For example, the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction states that something cannot be both one and many in the same respect at the same time. The Trinity claims that God is one and three. One and three are numerically contradictory if predicated on the same thing in the same respect. Therefore, the Trinity violates the law of non-contradiction.
You know, how many times do we have to explain the Trinity for people before they understand it? I don't get it. You know, how many times do we have to go through it? And just because it's hard to understand, it doesn't create contradictions. You know what I mean? Like, how long do we have to keep doing this? I don't know.
Also, the law of identity. If A equals C and B equals C, then A equals B. Transitivity and identity. The Father equals God. Premise 2. Premise 3. The Son equals God. Conclusion. Therefore, the Father is the Son. That doesn't make any sense. That's a fallacy. I know you have your answers for that. I love to get into that. I have back and forth with the Trinity. But you also mentioned in your first go around the wisdom of Solomon. And it's funny because even Orthodox scholars admit that the wisdom.
Yeah, he's just trying not to. You know what I mean? He's just being the least amount of charitable possible.
Solomon dates to like 100 to 50
Right.
BC. It's a Hellenistic text,
Right.
drawn heavily from Platonist and Pythagorean metaphysics. It's written in Greek, first of all. It's not even written in Hebrew. So I don't know why you think that's some old text that goes back to Solomon. It doesn't. So you need to show me how you even got there, when even your own scholars will say that it's definitely Hellenistic. You don't even have, your church doesn't even have a position on things like the age of the earth, because it can't have a position. It can't say, we agree with the.
Where is this rebuttal going? Like, age of the earth? What does that have to do with anything? I don't get it. This is just so crazy as a rebuttal. Like, it has nothing to do with Jay's opening.
Empirical data, because then your Bible is in contradiction with the empirical data. You can do the math yourself and go do the genealogies and figure out that you can go from Jesus back down to Adam using any of the genealogies, and you'll end up in a world that's 6,000 to 7,000 years old.
This is just the script. This is like the atheist script that they always put onto us. And even though we go, like everywhere, right? Like, exactly, all over the map. Like, you know, I really don't get it. You know, why do atheists show the least amount of charity to our positions? Do they just not want to learn it? Do they not care to debate with us? I don't know, but you know, they want us to learn all of their things, right? If God forbid we make a mistake in how we represent something like evolution, or however they understand evolution, or even if you go to an atheist and you say something like, you don't believe in God. No, I lack faith. I lack faith in God. I lack belief in God, right? It is the negation of the belief in your God. You know, they want it to be that specific, but then this stuff, come on, man,
is nonsense. And we can do this through predictive. We could test this out through empirical data. Predictive success every time when we dig rock layers, we always find the extinct fossils on the bottom of the layers.
This has nothing to do with anything. Like, this is priority monism, which is like a monad, more coherent than orthodoxy. I would just say Christianity. This has nothing to do with anything.
Down you go, you never find Homo sapiens at the bottom. You never find dinosaurs at the top. It's always the same layers for the same time periods every single time. 99.
The regular debaters from the last couple of decades, like William Lane Craig and Frank Turk, are any people to trust. I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think they read our stuff at all. We put out tons of arguments. William Lane Craig actually has developed a set of new arguments around mathematics and necessity and things like that. I don't think they're reading anything. I think they're just running the same scripts.
9% every single time. We know how old the Earth is. You can't have a global flood that wipes everything out if you don't even have enough water to cover the Earth. And not only that, how did the animals swim across the Atlantic Ocean around after 2000 BC, 2700 BC, whenever Noah was? So you have problems that you have to deal with that I don't have those problems. You also talked about John 1, the triad, or you said that I don't believe that the Trinity exists or the triad didn't exist after the 3rd or 4th century. I never said that. I don't know why you even brought that up. I actually argue the triad is in John 1. I actually agree with you. John 1 is a retelling of Genesis. Logos represents Adam, the new Adam, and in him, and aute zoe, which is the life, there's a triad there. Logos, God, Zoe, triad. However, it's not the later triad. It's not the Trinitarian Nicene Creed triad is what I argue. So inarche and hologos, kai hologos and pros ton theon, and then it says kai theos and hologos. That phrase kai theos and hologos.
Yeah, kai theos and God. What is? I don't know what he's saying. Is he trying to pretend reading Greek now? Kai theos and God. What does that have to do with God? What does that have to do with anything?
Is the predicate nominative in Greek.
Oh gosh. Oh goodness. You know, I want him to show that this is applied as God is applied as a predicate to Jesus. I really want him to show that, and I want him to show the Father's interpreted as a predicate, right, rather than identity. They just make all these random stuff up, you know. Oh, it's a predicate normative, and therefore God is applied like a title to Jesus. No, he is God. He's identified as God. It is not by predicates, by identity. How many times? Okay, even then, fine. You're debating J, right? Instead of going and trying to do an exegesis on John 1, why not attack his actual position, right? His actual position is that it's by identity. John 1 is by identity. Jesus is called God by identity. Why do you need to go and pretend to know Greek? Like, you're not going to be J in Greek. So, or like whatever. You're not going to be J in this game of history. Yeah, right? History is on his side also. um yeah, like yeah. We can't forget about the mixed cloth. We can't forget about the shellfish and the mixed cloth. And yeah. So I love this because Andrew Wilson's this is the perfect pace I would also be having right now. Like, what is going on, man?
It's a well-attested grammatically phenomenon that's all over the place. And if you switch theos with logos, it makes it an adjective. So actually, theos.
If you switch theos with logos, it makes an adjective. So God is an adjective to the word. So God is just a property to this guy.
Is not equal to logos in
the level of suppression of truth that someone has to do to make God into a title that is applied to a thing, because anything that is created is a thing. To apply the title of God to a thing is just insanity. I don't understand.
In this verse. I know your church would disagree, but I'm just going off what the basic Greek tells me, that the logos is divine. It's a divine being, but it's separate from the logos, and that's why it says logos was with God, not was God. And the logos was divine. That word theos in the predicate nominative means it's being used as an adjective. Just basic Greek. No, it's not basic Greek. It's pretty advanced actually, but that's what the best Greek scholars would agree with me. Logos, you say like it doesn't have meaning, that it bounces around from person to person, but that's because the word logos has multifaceted, multi-purposes. The word logos can mean reason, it can mean logic, it can mean word, it could mean letters, it could mean a lot of different things. So people use the word logos in different ways, but ultimately the logos that we're talking about is the function of the creative reason in the cosmos. It's the nous. It's the brightest emanation from the one. And I would argue that Christian theology is borrowing from our worldview with the logos to construct John's logos with the logo.
So the Christian theology, so the Apostle John is borrowing from Gnostic informants' worldview in order to construct the logos, even though the logos comes from Jewish Targum, the Jewish Targum culture, and it ties in Greek culture. Even though it does that, it borrows from the Gnostics, who just have a completely different view. And John, in the first John, argues against the Gnostics, and the entire church argued against the Gnostics in the very first century. That's what he's saying. Yeah, I mean, they have a little bit more liberal views than we do when it comes to these kinds of things.
And so, also, you said Neoplatonism died in the Middle Ages. Well, Werner Heisenberg was a Platonist. Iris Murdoch was a Platonist. Thomas Taylor was a Platonist. That's modern. That's all the way to the 20th century, 21st century, almost 21st century. There's Platonists today. Actually, I just met someone. I was in Athens, the Platonic Academy. So I don't know how you just thought that. Gemistus Plethon was debating Orthodox Palamites in Constantinople in the 1450s. He was a Platonist. What do you mean they died out in the Middle Ages? That's just wrong. But actually, I would argue there's a straight line from today to Plato. And the reason you might say, where did they all go? How come they all?
He just made an apostolic succession argument, guys. There's a straight line from today to Plato. You hear that? You hear that? All these dudes. He just made an apostolic succession argument. It's like, yeah, you could trace the line. You could trace the line from Plato to now. So that's I don't get where this is even going.
Just first of all, they got kicked out by Justinian. But second of all, we don't want massive people. We want elites. We want people who can think with reason. It's true. We're not trying to go out and convert people to Platonism. That's what you do, because that's what it is. It's a corporation. It's a religion. And so,
yeah, the Neoplatonist industrial complex doesn't exist, I guess. What is going on? I always try to expect good debates to happen, and then I always hear this kind of stuff happen. So I don't get this. Hey, Repairer brother, how you doing, man? Christ be with you. The Isnod chain, yes, the Isnod chain of Plato.
what else was I going to say? Okay, so how much time I left?
Right now, it looks like you still have almost 2 minutes.
Okay. So
I'm sorry, just
said,
over 2 minutes.
Okay, you said I don't account for things like the one and the many, because the one is just everything's just descending from the one. But I already explained the emanations solve this, and it's a metaphysical argument that I'm making. The solution to the one and the many preserves real unity and plurality without collapsing. In my monism, the many emanates from the one without being separate from it. So emanation preserves ontological unity while allowing real structured plurality. Therefore, the monism that I'm arguing preserves both unity and plurality. Now, the Trinity does. The Trinity, you're just saying it does because you have three heads in one God. But that's still one thing. You're still talking about one thing with has properties. So how can one thing that has properties and needs sacrifices and give scripture that has contradictions, like when was Jesus born? I don't know. Luke says 7 AD. Matthew says 4 BC when Herod died. Luke's census happened in 7 AD when Quirinius was governor. So this is what we're dealing with? All just contradictions and contradictions?
So I noticed that he actually didn't defend how he can ground the one becoming the many. So he didn't ground that at all. I just noticed that. And he has less than a minute left, or minute, a couple of seconds. But one of the objections Jay raised was, well, you have this one and you have this many, fine, but like, how are you grounding this? How does the one just randomly mutate and become the many? And he hasn't answered that question. I haven't been following the atheists lately. I used to follow atheists a long time ago with Dillahunty and all those other dudes. But man, are these like kind of the best? Is this the kind of their kings? Because bro, like this is not good, man. Yeah, for what it's worth, I think Jay was holding out. Jay was holding out. Oh yeah. I haven't watched this yet. I just figured, I'm gonna watch it anyway. Might as well just do a review. We don't convert people to Platonism is the funniest thing ever. We don't convert people to Platonism. What is there to convert to? There's no salvation. Oh yeah, he never gives justification. So how does the one become the many? It just has a mind of its own. Like what if it's not personal in his view, and it just mutates all of a sudden into all of these. He's like, well, we can have pluralism. Why? How? Why would you have pluralism if everything is fundamentally a singular substance? I don't get it.
But the Trinity does not even account for this. It's one being. One can't equal three. I'd like to hear you argue how one can be three at the same time, when my emanations actually solves this.
All right.
His emanations are just abstract concepts. They're just literally, they're just abstract realities. So what? You're just gonna posit a bunch of abstract realities and say it just solves everything? All right, fine. You know what? I'm not gonna. I'll let Jay answer.
We've got about pretty close to 8,000 live viewers this fine evening. Appreciate that from everybody. We're going to move into the debaters' closings and the hour one section, and then we're going to move into open debate. Jay Dyer, you have 10 minutes on the clock for your closing. Go ahead when you're ready.
Right. So again, I think this is kind of funny because half of what I said, he didn't even understand. First of all, negation in my view and using negation doesn't mean that I have the same view of you, right? Or as you. So the fact, yeah, you did. You said that, well, I have negation too. Yeah, but you don't have the idea of positive, energetic presence in this world of the one. You have the emanations that are not the one, but they supposedly reflect or are in some way perhaps participatory in the one. How do we know that? And why should we think that? If the one is perfect, then why would we think that something that is not the one and is imperfect somehow reflects or participates in the one? I don't think you even thought about the very classic refutations of Platonism. And
I agree. So when I've seen people interact with Christian theology, I have found that the quality of argumentation that they make against Christian theology is like maybe a 3 out of 10. You know what I mean? Like maybe a 4. Like I've just seen them not have any level of understanding of the depth of Christian theology in the philosophical sense. Definitely not in the philosophical sense. Definitely not in the philosophical sense, but really, really, really not in the biblical sense. Like they don't take any time to understand the scripture and what the scripture is. So yeah, he seems to not even understand basic Christian theology. If he wants to make an argument against the Trinity, make an argument against the Trinity. Don't just sit there and claim that it's 1 and 3. Make a formal distinction. Make a formal argument. Actually put it down to paper. Make a syllogism and then put it out there. You know what I mean? Like instead of just claiming stuff in an opening statement. Uh I honestly think, you know what it is? Of course, I think it's true, but I think it just goes over a lot of people's head. In a lot of ways, I just think the Trinity, to argue against the Trinity. Let's say I was trying to argue against the Trinity, it would just take me a long time if I was not a Christian. So it kind of makes sense that he can't, right?
Platonism that have been around for centuries and millennia. People have been.
I would say Alex, is fair and actually does the research. Like I would say Alex is top tier. Like he's in the absolute top tier. I agree because he actually does the work of understanding Christianity.
Critiquing these positions. What I said was that 99% of today's academics and scientists laugh at Neoplatonism. I cited Werner Heisenberg about Neoplatonic ideas in my book 10 years ago. I'm well aware of what he said about fundamental reality bearing and showing geometric structure. And I think that's interesting. And I cite Paul Davies' book, Mind of God, all the time, where you have people like Roger Penrose, who's a modern mathematician. Those are mathematicians and physicists who speculate and believe in something that makes sense with a Christian paradigm, that fundamental reality is ordered and structured. But this reality is way less perfect than the higher reality that you talk about. In fact, again, why ought we think that there's any similarity between the perfect monadic unity reality and the imperfect multiplicity becoming flux reality that we live in? It's almost like you're not even aware of the basic.
I feel like I remember when the New Atheist came about, and man, they were so aggressive with Dawkins and Hitchens and all those other guys, and they've just fallen. They just kind of those arguments have just gotten tired. When I saw the Eli, I don't know how to say Elijah, versus Dan Barker debate, revealed apologetics. I'm just gonna say revealed apologetics. That's his YouTube handle. Um, I'm like, man, these are rote, tired arguments, and it's been refuted 100 times.
Critique of Platonism. How does the realm of the forms and the perfect idea up there relate to the imperfect, tainted, destructive chaos realm down here? Because they have oppositional characteristics. Now, you can say and assert that they have a similarity and they share in each other, but you don't have an argument for that other than to keep asserting that it is so. You seem to think that laying out the position of Neoplatonism is an argument. You said, well, it reconciles the one and the many. It does not reconcile the one and the many because, as I just pointed out to you, the one does not have the characteristics of the many because it's perfection at a higher level. If many is imperfect, then it's not like the one. And if you're going to say, well, but it's also kind of like the one, how do we know? That's the thing in question. These are classic critiques of Platonism. You say that 3 and 1 cannot, there's not a thing that can be 3 and 1 at the same time. Really? You ever seen this? This is a basic number. Is this one or is it three? Oh, it's both at the same time. Is it more a single number or more three? It's both. So even objects in this world, as we've argued countless times against the Muslims, can be both one and many at the same time. Furthermore, the way you even laid it out, something cannot be one and many at the same time and in the same way. Well, guess what? The Trinity is not one and many at the same time.
I would have let the Trinity comment just slide only because he didn't make a formal argument. He just kind of made an assertion. So, I mean, I would have just let it slide. I wouldn't have done that. But now I feel like he's gonna, grab onto that.
In the same way, because the persons are not the same thing as the essence. So it's not the same thing in the same way, even according to our doctrine. So again, I don't think you understand what these arguments actually are about. The logical problem of the Trinity is something that we've also dealt with many times when it comes to Muslims, and the whole argument trades on the word God only having one referent. But Neil seems to be really adept at word concept fallacies by thinking that a word always has a single same referent. In fact, when I brought up the many different uses of logos throughout the ancient Greek philosophers, my point, and you backed that up, was to say, yes, correct, they all say these different things. And you said, but my position is the right one. How do we know that? What is the justification for choosing the Neoplatonic idea? Or if we're even if we're going to be a Neoplatonist, for example, you have Iamblichus, who's a ritual magic Neoplatonist, and then you have Plotinus, who's a sit around and speculate and think your way back to the one Neoplatonist. Which one is the real Neoplatonism?
I almost get a sense he's arguing against Protestantism at this point.
Which one is the Neoplatonism? It's the one that you've made up. And that's the thing, is that there's no justification for Neil's Platonism, which is his own made up Neoplatonism. Now, counting by identity versus counting by division is what the early church fathers and even many in the ancient world used to distinguish different ways of counting different types of things. So the divine essence, for example, is counted by dividing. That's why the Nicene Creed says one and undivided. That's counting by division. And many ancient Greek philosophers also counted this way. Counting by identity is a different way of counting, and certain types of things that you can't think of as having any partitions, you count by identity. For example, logical sets or laws of logic, right? So for example, the law of non-contradiction, there's no half of a law of non-contradiction, right? So it's an abstract object that you have to count by identity. Thus, you can't count by division. And throughout the history of the world, people have counted different things in different ways. Even in the Middle Ages, they began to recognize in medieval grammar texts and mathematical texts how to count different things in different ways. So they had this distinction by first order imposition and second order imposition, even in the Middle Ages when it came to counting. So this is nothing new. But what you're saying with the logical problem of the Trinity is, again, something that we've elucidated in all the Muslim debates when it comes up many, many times over, is just conflating two different ways of counting. And the funny thing about that is that in the case of Muslims, they also counted in various ways in the ancient world. They counted by division, for example, in Al-Ghazali. Many ancient Greek philosophers, who I'm sure you actually would like, also counted by division and counted other things in other ways by identity. So if you understand that, that really sort of dissolves the whole issue with counting and the logical problem of the Trinity, and also the fact that the word God doesn't have a single referent in divine revelation. God can refer to God himself in terms of divine persons. It can refer to the divine nature. It can refer to divine operations or attributes. It can refer to human.
I'm going to skip to, his rebuttal. Let's see what he says.
Again, what I think first presentation. Now, maybe you've got some way, what philosophers of the Renaissance. So I want to know, again, Neil,
book with a number 3 on it. That was like mind blowing when I saw that. That was hilarious. But yeah, you want to know why should I believe your worldview? Why should I care? Well, first of all, I never said that I'm trying to get modern science to be grounded in all these. I want everyone to be a Platonist and all believe in my stuff. These are metaphysical arguments. These are metaphysical arguments that account for things, just as you're doing. The difference is my worldview allows for things like empirical data and we have the predictive success on our side, where you are bogged down by dogmas that get you to you have to believe the earth is 6,000 years old, or that evolution is false, and you just flat out.
I don't know. Like, do I have to believe the earth is 6,000 years old in order to be a Christian?
Just deny in your face physical.
It's fine if some Christians do believe that, and it's fine if some Christians don't. What is that a requirement?
Evidence of transitional fossils, where I don't have to do that. So I don't care if 99.9%.
It's like, do I lose my salvation if I don't? If I believe it's 10,000 years old? Like, I don't know where he's going with this.
Of empiricists or atheists, great. I don't care if they're atheists. It means nothing to me. It doesn't bother me one bit. What we're doing in philosophy and Platonism is a totally different thing. We're doing metaphysical arguments and trying to account for the world and ethics and and stuff like that. But we can just negate your worldview off the rip just because of how flawed it is, and we can just go through and say, and I pointed some things out to you, the major contradictions in your biblical corpus And I wasn't talking about anthropomorphic stuff. Like, yeah, okay, maybe you can get away with saying God being jealous is anthropomorphic, and he wasn't really jealous, but that's just how it's reflected in the story. But you still have an answer. Why does God need sacrifices? Why does God need to send himself to save the world from himself? That's not an omniscient God. That's not an all-powerful God that needs to do all these things. So a perfect and omniscient being doesn't regret prior actions. Yahweh regrets making the earth in Genesis 6. He says, I, Yahweh, regretted that I have made the earth. So Yahweh can't be a perfect omniscient being. So I'm already more coherent with you. This debate's over at that point.
Thank you so much for hanging out, Dexter. I appreciate it, brother. We will talk soon. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, brother. Love you. Have a good day.
I'm already, even if you don't think that my metaphysical arguments can be proven with whatever. I mean, why should I believe in your monad? Well, I don't have to believe in yours because you're giving me things that I can just cancel out just because of the fallacies. An all perfect being does not need anything. Can't be jealous. Can't not know things. Can't lose battles. In the book of Judges, I have my notes here. Yahweh goes up against the Midianites.
Yeah, I know a lot of scientific people in my circle. I've known a couple of scientists who are doing research on this. I wish I knew better about biology and chemistry in order to think through evolution a little bit better. But from what I know, macroevolution, at least what's posited, has problems. It's not foolproof what they presented. And, I definitely think there are massive problems with what they presented. There's definitely no evidence for something like abiogenesis. There's absolutely no evidence of that. But, I don't know where this guy is getting his stuff from.
And it says that the spirit of Yahweh was with the Judahites, but the Judahites couldn't defeat the Midianites because they had iron chariots. The spirit of God was with the Judahites.
Oh my gosh, the iron chariots. How many times do these guys going to bring this up over and over and over again? The iron chariots argument. Oh my goodness.
It says, how else do you exegete that? Do I have to be an Orthodox priest to exegete that? No. I can use my own reasoning and say that is not a perfect God. That is a God that is flawed. This is a God that dashes little children against rocks and is boasting about it in the Psalms. And let's talk about you brought up the dating of the text, and I was talking about Wisdom of Solomon in particular.
There is no real. There's no posited, evidenced theory of abiogenesis that even works. There's theories, or like there's propositions put out. I don't even want to say it's a theory because theory requires some level of evidence. There's propositions put out, but there is nothing that comes close to creating complex life. Nothing from what from what I've understood, and there's nothing that comes close to actually representing what could have happened in a early Earth, even according to their view, that can create complex life. Remember, all life has to come under evolution from a single source. Can't come from multiple sources.
Which is clearly Hellenistic. It's written in Greek, first of all. Game over. They don't even have a Hebrew version. It's a Greek text. And you said, I'm talking about the whole corpus of Solomon. Well, let's talk about the whole corpus of Solomon then. None of it. There's no evidence for any of it going back before like 400 at the latest. And I can tell you how I know this. When Israel was conquered by the Assyrians in 586 BCE, a bunch of thousands of Jews fled down to Elephantine while all the rest of them went to Babylon in captivity. But they set up a colony called Elephantine, and they set up a temple of Yahweh there. And they call themselves Judaios in Greek, Yehudim in Hebrew. And they wrote Aramaic texts, and we have hundreds of them. Well, so we have a perfect time capsule.
Like all this stuff doesn't have anything to do with anything. It's just bringing up random facts. I understand he knows a lot of information. I understand he's going to bring up a whole conspiracy around this stuff. This is a classic atheistic move. I understand that, but it has nothing to do with a formal argument. He's not really making anything happen.
From 586 to 400 is when they left and went back to Jerusalem. That's 186 years. So this is after the first temple period. Well, guess what you find there? You don't find anything about the Torah. There's not a mention.
The age of the earth we call theologomeno, not a dogma, like who are the sons of God. Do they teach a particular age of the earth repair? I wouldn't think they would, because some of the Greek fathers believed, The universe just happened at one moment in time and things like that. So I wouldn't think that their Eastern Orthodox Church would be dogmatic about this, but I don't know why this guy's harping about this. He's probably just reading, a singular perspective that's maybe like evangelical young earth Christians. And I have nothing against that, by the way. Like, I have nothing against if you're going to posit a young earth. But it's like, why is that an issue right now? You know what I mean? That's not an issue for this argument.
Single mention of Abraham, not a single mention of Moses, not a single mention of Jacob, not a single
Okay.
mention of the 12 tribes, not a single mention of Moses, no Noah, no Adam and Eve, nothing, no Torah, nothing. They get a letter in the year 410, I think it is, from Jerusalem. They get a letter sent to them. We had the letter, we found it, we dug it up, and it's telling them for the first time how to do a Passover. We were starting this new thing called Passover. This is in 410 BCE, this new thing called Passover, and we celebrated on Nisan 14. Well, it's every year is on Nisan 14. That's like me telling you to celebrate Christmas on December 25th. It's all you should already know that. So these are the Old Testament that you think goes back to Moses and Solomon. That's nonsense. Prove it. There's not a single piece of evidence for the Exodus anywhere. There's no mention of Moses in any Egyptian sources. Joseph in the Old Testament was the vizier of the entire Egyptian kingdom, the second highest, most powerful person in the entire Egyptian kingdom. Well, guess what we have from Egypt? Even to this day, we have all the records of all the pharaohs and their viziers. None of them mention any Joseph. We don't know. Joseph doesn't exist. He's made up. In fact, the name Yosef probably is some sort of derivative from Osiris. Some scholars point out some sort of a euhemerization of Osiris, how he descends into the underworld, into the dungeon, and it rises up and becomes the second.
Now, I will admit, I have not looked at the evidence in a long time for things like the Exodus. There have been scholars that have put out things, propositions of how that happened. I'll clearly admit that that's not my strength. I haven't looked into pre-exile, going back to Abraham, going back to Moses, Exodus, and then the patristic era in that area. However, I do know that archaeologically, for example, some have posited sites for Sodom and Gomorrah. They have found those kinds of things. As far as the reliability of those, I'm not going to sit here and claim it because I just haven't studied it, but I'm pretty sure there's archaeological evidence for a lot of these things. For example, the Old Testament, if the Israelites would have been killed off, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and thus the Messiah would not have been birthed to save mankind. Yes, of course. There's I agree. The problem is not God, but it's man's rebellion against God. I completely agree, but he's asking for, should we have evidence for particular things in the Exodus and things like that? Remember, it's not so easy to just go and dig up a bunch of evidence because, for example, right? You'd have to search in the entire crossing. What is it? You'd have to search this massive piece of land right over here between wherever the crossing sites are, which I don't know exactly where the crossing sites are proposed to be. I think it is supposed to be one of these crossing sites, right? Like one of these smaller crossing sites. They're in the sea. So we're talking this massive area. This is not a small area to go and just search. And then you'd also have to search underneath. Which is again not easy. We're looking for, we're talking thousands of years ago. So this is a huge area. Some people posit this. I think they posit this area. I don't know. But the other thing that people have told me is that there's restrictions. So there's restrictions around some of these things. So it is what it is. Yeah, it's not accessible for Christians to just go do a bunch of excavations. But I do know that there's areas here that are proposed. Again, this is like, go into this entire area and try to find evidence while the governments here are not going to let you do that. You know what I mean? That the governments here are not going to just let you dig around. And I mean, maybe we should have better evidence. I'm not sure. I haven't looked into this, but it's a massive area. It's an absolutely massive area.
Most High next to Amit. So there's a lot of things we can see what's going on in the Old Testament text, like the story of the flood with Noah.
But we do know certain things. We know where Mount Sinai is. We know where, once Israel actually comes about, we do know the geography of Israel. We know what happens there. We know the rest of the stuff. And we also know that Israel always interacted with the world powers. So let's say the Egypt story is just bogus, like hypothetically, right? The rest of the stories, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, right? Greece and Rome, all of those nations have interacted with Israel. We have very good records of those. So we're just saying they're going to lie about the Exodus, and then every other part of their history is correct. That seems unlikely to me.
Where he lets off a raven and a dove, and the raven and the dove come back 7 days later to tell him he's on land. Well, sure enough, we got Sumerian and Akkadian tablets that predate the Bible by 2,000 years about the Epic of Gilgamesh, and there's another source I'm thinking of, my mind slipping right, the name of it's slipping my mind right now, but it has this exact same story where what's his name? I can't remember his name. He's on the ark, and he's got all the animals, 2 of each animal, same story, and he lets off a dove and a raven that come back 7 days later, but it's not Noah. That sucks. It's not Jewish. This is Akkadian. This is just borrowing other stories and then personalizing it. And how do we know that?
I've never found another story that's exactly the same as Noah's story. What do they propose? Epic of Gilgamesh? Go read an Epic of Gilgamesh and then tell me that's the same story. Other than the fact that there's a flood and there's a guy leaving, trying to escape the flood, what else is there?
Just assert that they do this. Right here, see those yellow and black texts that I'm pointing to? Those are called pseudepigrapha. You should read them. They're false writings.
Yeah, I have them right here.
Yeah, they're false writings. They're fake text, writing in the names of other people. And this is like the Christians pick up on this. Pseudo-Dionysius, 5th century AD. He's not a 1st century writer. He's a 5th century writer adopting Neoplatonism. So when I see these things, pseudo-text, no evidence, I go, my reasoning tells me this is not the true religion. This is not the true worldview. So I have a more simple worldview that accounts for things, and that's why I go with Neoplatonism.
Gentlemen. We just got a major raid in, which I really appreciate. We're at almost 10,000 live between all platforms.
Nice.
Just about 8,000 live on YouTube at the moment. Appreciate it very much for the raid. Yeah, I do pretty well. Yeah. Anyway, I appreciate it very much. I don't know who raided me. Maybe a mod can let me know so that we can think.
Can I grab a water real quick?
Yeah, you can grab a water. We're going to take a brief intermission for 2 minutes, guys, before we get to the open debate. If you want to grab anything else, it's your guys' job to do.
It's not 3. 3 is the numeral.
Count things. We don't just put 3 on something and the number 3.
Yeah, so is that 3? Are we going to go like back and forth with any time or just
no time on this one? Just open floor.
So I'll just start with Neil. I'm not talking about the book. I'm talking about the numeral 3. Is the numeral one thing or is it 3?
Well, it's one number, so it's the number 3.
So it's 1 and 3.
It's the number 3, but it's one thing.
Yeah. So is that 3 things and one thing?
It's not 3 things. It's one thing.
The number 3 is not 3.
The number 3 can count. You can count 3 things using the number 3.
This is 3 and 1.
It's just the number 3 on a piece of paper. That means nothing.
Right, so it's 1 and 3.
No, it's not. It's one thing.
It's not 3.
It's one thing with the number 3 on it.
So
We use 3. We use 3 to count things. We don't just put 3 on something
This is funny though. I gotta admit, it's a little bit funny.
and it becomes 3.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So all numbers are only one thing.
This has a bunch of numbers on it. Does that make it the numbers?
Well, again, whether you think it has ontological existence or not is different from the fact that the number 3 is not just 1; it's also 3.
But it's one thing that has the number 3 on it. That's
And what
literally
does the
reality.
number 3 signify, Neil?
3.
Thank you.
But that doesn't make the number. That doesn't
This is
make that
also-
3 things.
Yeah,
That's
and
just what
this
the
is
number
also a
sig-
This is also a signifier, right?
Yeah, but if you gave me that, I would
1
say
and 3
3
are
what?
signifiers, right?
If you gave me that to
But even then, I would kind of again err away from using Trinitarian analogies in the real world. Because they all fail at some point. Like I said, I think the Trinity is almost this supernatural thing that's been revealed by God in the Bible, and then the church has discovered it. You can't like reason yourself to the Trinity like just by natural mental assent. You know what I mean? You can't use an analogy. You can't do any of that stuff.
signify 3, I would say 3 what?
It
3
doesn't
books?
matter.
Yes, it does matter.
No,
No,
it
we're trying to be coherent here, right? Coherent is that the debate?
If it's a signifier, then 1 is also a signifier.
So you're just saying 1 is 3. Great. Gets me nowhere.
No, I'm
It's not
saying it's
convincing.
3 and 1. Neil, are you fundamentally unable to understand that?
No, I understand what you're trying to say. It doesn't make sense though.
Okay, then is the
1
number
can't be
1?
3.
Is the
Either
number
1 is 1
also
or
a
3 is 3.
signifier? This is fundamentally stupid. Is the number 1 a signifier?
Yes.
Okay, how many is that?
That's 1.
Okay. How many is that one?
That's a 1 and a 2.
No, this.
2.
Okay, so is this one object itself, the symbol itself?
The symbol is 2.
Thank
Okay,
you.
But
Thank
that's
you.
not. But you can't say that this book is now 2 things now.
But one is also a symbol.
I know, but the book
So
is
it's
still
a,
one
you already
thing.
admitted it's a both and, Neil.
No, you asked me what the symbol means. That was you slipped that
It's
in there
a
at the end.
signifier. They're
Nice
signifying
try.
one.
It didn't
This
work.
is one object that's a signifier of 2 things.
Right, but you're still holding one thing in your hand.
I'm talking
So-
about the numbers, Neil. Not
I know
the
the
book.
number means 2. I get that, but
Okay,
the
but
thing
is
in your
the-
hand is still one
Neil,
thing.
this is fundamentally stupid. The number
It is
itself,
fundamentally
the
stupid.
numeral,
You're
the
right. It
symbol.
is so fundamentally stupid.
Okay, so this. What is this?
That's the Roman numeral 2.
And what is this?
2.
Right. So
Okay.
they both refer to what?
Those numbers, those symbols mean 2.
Right.
2
Is
what?
this one thing as a whole?
The number
This
is
one
2.
thing.
I kind of want Jay to get to the point, though, to be honest with you. But
The number
Is
means
this
2.
one thing on the page right here?
It is one thing on the page, yes,
Thank you. So it's
One
one
symbol.
in many. You just admitted it.
but it's still one thing.
Are you fundamentally stupid? You just
I'm
said
asking
it's
you.
also
You can say
and
one
many.
thing is. You can put a number 2 on
Neil,
my head and say I'm 2
One
things
and
now.
many is the point of this, that something can be singular and also many at the same time. For example, take an object like a
Single
book. Neil, is a book, does it have many parts?
Yes,
Okay, is it also one book?
it's one book.
Thank you. So it's one and many. So objects can be one and many at the same
It's
time.
still one
Answering
book.
your question.
Yes, but that now you have a problem. Now you have one entity with 3 parts. How do you make it 3 distinct?
Jay, man, he was he was behaved this whole time, and then now Jay's back to being Jay.
things?
Neil,
but it's
you
still one
argue
entity.
that something can't be one and many at the same time.
I can have different parts. I didn't say that. I said one can have different parts. I didn't say one can be many at the same time. That's why the
You said
emanations is a
something-
better account for
You
the
said
emanations accounts better.
I'll say exactly what you said. Something cannot be one and many at the same time in the
It can
same way.
have many parts, is what I said.
No, you said quote, something cannot be one and many at the same time in the same way.
Exactly.
I wrote down the quote.
I agree with that.
Okay.
I've never stop
Is
saying
this
that.
book one thing and many things at the
It's
same
one
time?
thing with many parts.
Mhm.
That's
So
different.
it's one and many?
It's one thing with many parts. That's different.
So is it one and many at the same time?
It's one book with many parts. That's
so
how you
it's one
describe
and
it.
many.
It's one and many. Yeah, it's one in many parts.
Thank
That's-
you. That's so you
That was
refuted your original. You
cheap,
admitted
dude.
your
That was
previous thing is
cheap.
false.
Anyone
You just-
watching
you
this
just
with a
kinda-
normal IQ understands what just
So
happened.
now you're going into ad hominem because
Oh,
you
you're right.
own
All right,
the
maybe I'll lay out
fundamental.
the ad homs then. Okay. Is there any more questions you got?
Sure.
I want to know what the Trinity. I want to know how the Trinity. I mean, you're saying the Trinity can be 1 and 3 at the same time. Fine, we can move past that. I think it's nonsense.
Yeah, but you already
Yeah, but yeah, okay. So raising issues about the Trinity kind of doesn't matter. But I understand that he's saying the issue. But the question is whether you could ground everything inside of a monad. I understand that he's going to raise issue about the Trinity, but the issues he's going to raise about the Trinity is just classical issues. He's going to say, how are you going to count the essence? How are you going to count the persons and all these other things?
admitted the contradiction, so you can think it's nonsense, but you
I
can't.
never
explain
admitted the
why.
contradiction. I'm talking about
Well,
parts.
you just
versus, talking about parts versus.
You just contradict yourself like 10 times.
Oh, you think I did?
You said the
You
parts
want
are
people
many.
to think I did.
Is
You
it
want
one
people
and
to
many?
think I did. It's one thing with many parts.
So it's one and many.
So it's one thing with many
And
parts.
many. Thank you. So again, you're repeating yourself over and over.
You want me to say that? Then sure. You want me to be incoherent? Because I'm not going to do it.
Do I want you to be incoherent?
Yeah, is it one and many? No, it's not one and many.
You're on
It's
your own,
one
bro.
thing with many parts. Am I many things at once?
Yeah, you
My
have many
knee-
parts.
Something else? Yeah, I have many parts. Exactly. I have a hand. I have an eyeball. But it's all Neil. I have different cells.
So,
I don't
so it's one and many. Thank you. You're just making
one
my
and many
case.
parts. Why can't you
The
agree
fact that you
it's
add
many?
parts doesn't matter, Neil, because it's
Yes,
one
it
and many.
does.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does. Parts
If
is
you
what
admit
means.
that it's many, it doesn't matter. Obviously, many would be parts. That's contained in the idea of many.
But that's all I'm agreeing to is that it's one thing still with
So it's
different
one
parts
and
within it.
many, regardless of part. Parts is contained in the idea of many.
Yeah, but many is the parts. It's not many different things. It's not different things
wait.
altogether.
The parts aren't different things.
The parts are different parts.
You said they're not different things.
The parts are different parts.
You said they're not different things.
Well, they're not. My hand is still Neil's hand. It's part of me.
Okay, but it's not a different thing from your
It's not
arm.
your hand. It's not
You
Andrew's
said
hand.
it's not different things.
Can
Neil.
it be Neil's? Can my hand be your
Is it a
hand?
different
No.
thing from your leg?
Yes.
So it is different things.
So do you guys understand what they're trying to say? Though, because at some point I'm just like, why are they arguing about this? I mean, we kind of skip ahead.
These are fundamental things.
The ancient world to have existed and been like. You have another authority, and I don't reject quote science, but again, I'm making a different point about when you see the rock layers or when you see the strata, there's nothing about that immediately
Right.
tells you a time frame or an age. So how
Fair.
do you know
Fair.
today?
Fair, but let me ask you this: when you find contradictory data, for example, when we go to places like Elephantine and they're doing the opposite, they're making graven images, they're polytheist. They are
Well,
not.
hold on. Now you're going to something different.
I know. I'm saying for let's not talk about just looking at rocks. I'm talking about evidence that goes against the biblical narrative. For example, when we go in places that say that where there's Jews living after the first temple period, and we look at all their writings, and that has nothing to do with what the Bible said they were like. They're completely different. They're doing the opposite. They're eating pork. They're doing stuff on Sabbath. They are worshiping multiple gods with Yahweh.
That's like saying the Essenes disproves Judaism because the Essenes did something totally different than the Jews.
What are the Essenes doing that goes against the biblical narrative? I'm not talking about.
Well, they were like monastic. They were like completely.
I'm not talking about different sects.
Listen to me. They had a Jewish Gnostic perspective.
Yeah. They were like completely different.
They believed that they were the sons of light, and they had certain ascetic practices.
They were like monastics that just lived off by themselves. And there are some. By the way, in scholarship, it's a very popular theory that Jesus and John the Baptist especially might have come from the Essenes because of how monastic some of their ideas are. Many scholars have tried to see which tradition Jesus might have come from in John the Baptist, and they really can't trace it. But some people have posited that it's the Essenes. I don't buy it. I don't buy that at all, because the Essenes have really weird stuff. But the reason they say that is because, especially in the book of John, for example, and things like that, where Jesus calls himself light, and he kind of denotes ascetic practices, like what is it? If your eye calls you to sin, cut it off, and things like that. Very ascetical sayings comes from Essene practices, apparently. And so a lot of scholars say, oh, this is good evidence that Jesus might have come from the Essenes, right? So it's just a theory.
The Torah doesn't teach. So my argument is,
but the Essenes have the Torah. The Essenes have the Torah. Okay, go ahead.
It doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is that the fact that there's a sect somewhere that's doing things different in no way leads you to the conclusion that the Jews with the Torah or the Jews in Israel are doing that they don't exist or that they're not there. It's an argument from silence.
It's not an argument from silence. It's actually the evidence is the opposite of the historical claims from the Bible. There's evidence
How do you know that the Jews didn't exist prior to this sect? Wouldn't the Jews
I didn't say they didn't exist. Okay, I said there's no evidence that they were Torah observant. There's no evidence that they even knew what the Torah was. In fact, the things that they're doing in their text and in the archaeology shows the exact opposite that they weren't.
I got you. Okay, so and this is what century you're saying?
Are you talking about Elephantine? Mm-hmm. 586 to 400 BC. Okay, 6th century, 5th century.
And what main scholars have this opinion? Because I'm going to show you scholars who said the opposite of that. Where are you getting this?
Well, okay, I can go to Gad Barnea. I can go to Jonathan Adler, Russell Kemerkin, Thomas L. Thomas, Philip R. Davies. I could go to let's see. I could go to Bruce Loudon. I can keep going on and on about this.
Okay, so everybody note these scholars because we have no idea who.
Write those down, please. Everyone write.
The basic argument is before 300, there's nothing Hebrew. You find these stories only the Hellenistic period. Yeah. Again, serious scholarship would have debunked a lot of the stuff. You gotta admit, okay, so for like scholarship, right, especially when it comes to historical scholarship, they like mystery and they like figuring things out. They like figuring new things out as far as what some of the things are, because if you just bring up the narrative, like there's this flat narrative, they don't like that. They want to create like all these differences. So one of the things that comes about is that Jesus was, for example, an apocalyptic figure. So he came out of one of these Jewish cultish sects, and he comes out of one of those things. And if you look at a lot of the Jesus's predictions, what is it about? Apocalypse. So they'll take usually a part of the Gospels, and they'll take that one part of the Gospel and say, oh, look, like this aligns with some of what these guys are saying, and this aligns with some of what these guys are saying. But even someone as when you could find very respected scholars, they'll say we just can't nail Jesus down to a particular sect. He doesn't look like he comes from the Essenes because he also contradicts a lot of their stuff, right? And when you look at, like for example, he affirms the Pharisees' view of resurrection, and the other thing he quotes extensively from the Old Testament, not just the Torah, right? So he quotes from the Psalms, he quotes from the prophets. So what is that? You know what I mean? He's not just Torah observant. He believes in the resurrection. That's a huge one. The fact that he believes in the resurrection. So it is a confusing thing for a lot of scholars where Jesus's origins came from.
goes down. Bruce Loudon, Thomas L. Thomas,
So
Philip Davies, Russell Gummerkin.
Hang on. Let Jay respond here.
Just so people know.
Let him respond. Let him respond.
So now when we go to, for example, the again, just using this as an example text, which refutes also this claim and the other claim, or at least it shows contrary scholarly evidence. So again, Oxford opinion to the Bible. The book of Proverbs deals with the prophetic tradition, the writings, different from the prophetic.
I have not. What is that? Stone of Gabriel? What is a stone of Gabriel? Oh, Gabriel's vision? This looks really familiar. It's 87 lines, found 13 years ago in the bank of the Dead Sea, 1st century BC, during Second Temple. What is it? Has suffering messiahs and resurrection after 3 days. Interesting. I never heard of this. I never heard of this. Yeah. That's interesting. I never heard of that. Is it related to a particular yeah, well, look, I'm not completely ruling out the fact that there's other inspirations for some of the Jewish mindset around 1st century BC, especially considering they were expecting a liberation. So I would assume there would be other things that come about.
Tradition, the writings of this wisdom literature consist in parts of sayings, short pithy forms, etc. The Hebrew word is translated to mean comparisons, and then it goes on to say that many of these texts date to the 5th century BCE, but also many of them are actually even earlier to the pre-monarchic position. So you said earlier that there's no older evidence for this period for the book of Proverbs.
Yeah,
I mean, mainline, non-conservative necessarily. This is just Oxford.
That's a linguistic claim, first of all.
Hold on. Do you have a linguistic degree?
I would ask that scholar.
Are you a textual scholar? Hold on. Are you a textual scholar first?
I'm not a textual scholar. What did I say I was?
How do you know about linguistic claims?
Because I talk to textual scholars.
Okay, but that doesn't make you a textual scholar.
No, I didn't say I was a textual scholar. You just made this.
But you're acting like the fact that you cited the scholars necessarily means that. By the way, where was it? It didn't argue that the argument's on the basis of the words.
No, it does, well, then show me the evidence.
It said the word Proverbs is from that time period, and then it says that the Proverbs themselves are pre-monarchic.
Where are they? Who's talking? Who's citing it?
I mean, I don't know what he's asking for. He's reading out of a scholarly source, which is a secondary source. I mean, does he need to present every bit of primary evidence? Is that the only thing? Because when it comes to this, a lot of scholars summarize what is evidence and what is their opinion about this stuff. And then how did he jump to the fact that it's a linguistic argument? Is he just familiar with it or something? I don't know.
Where's the text? What? You don't think we have texts that go back that far? We do. None of them cite Proverbs. None of the texts from that period cite Proverbs. No one mentions Proverbs. The first person to
that's an argument from silence. That scholars are saying that the book of Proverbs.
Scholars are making linguistic arguments on this.
No, they're not just making linguistic arguments. They're also making archaeological arguments.
There's no archaeological data to show that Solomon was right. There's no Solomon text in archaeology. I'm telling you that. There's nothing there.
Well, you're saying an argument from silence. You're saying these things, but what I'm showing you is that there's competing scholarly claims. How do we know what's true between these?
I would say what you're reading is probably outdated scholarship. When is that dated to? What is that book from? What year is that book from?
How do you know?
What year?
What counts as outdated?
Because the most up-to-date, most rigorous academics are all agreeing that we don't have any evidence of the Bible. Now, there might have been some layers of...
So all of the modern day scholars are agreeing we don't have any evidence of the Bible? Man, get out of here, man. Like what? All of the modern day scholars are agreeing with that. When someone makes stuff like that, you just know that they're acting more like a zealot. Like, most things are a little bit more nuanced. Like, all the scholars are agreeing there's no evidence of the Bible? Like, come on, man.
Solomon, do go back that far.
What counts as outdated?
I don't know. 20 years ago.
So whatever book I cite, right?
No, 20 years, probably. It's been 20 years.
How do you still don't say arbitrary this is?
No, it can still be correct, but I'm telling you there's no evidence.
Well, I know you're telling me that, but you're not actually proving that. You're saying that when I give you scholars with hold on.
So when a scholar said something.
When I give you counter scholars, we're in a dilemma then where we have to figure out, well, how do we know which scholars are right or wrong? And I'm asking you, what tells you? And you said, well, it's got to be up to date. And I said, That's arbitrary. How do you know what the up-to-date is? You said, oh, it's got to be 20 years. This is all arbitrary.
You just asked me what I think is outdated, and I just gave you a number.
You're in a debate. That means you have to make good arguments, Neil.
But Jay, what I'm telling you is, scholars can guess Solomon is dated to the 5th century or whatever. Fine, based on linguistic.
So now you're saying they're guessing. How do you know they're guessing?
Because we don't have any text from that period.
Well, you're just saying your position.
They all are guessing. None of these texts go back to that far. Do you not know that?
You're just asserting the Neil. How do you know that?
Do you know how do you know 0 biblical manuscripts that are older?
That. How do you know that?
Because we don't have a single manuscript of the Bible before the Dead Sea Scrolls.
You just keep asserting this. How do you know that assertion?
Wait, no, we do. There are manuscripts that go back. I'll pull it up.
It's true.
Because we don't have them. Well, show me where one exists. Is there one in the museum somewhere?
I'm giving you counter-textual evidence from scholars.
And I'm saying that it doesn't exist.
Neil, I know you're saying that.
There's no physical copy of it.
Neil, hang on. Let's see if we can untangle this. Okay, just a little bit here. All right. We'll start with Neil. Neil, I believe, are you saying your argument is there's no physical evidence for this?
Yes.
Okay. And then Jay will operate off that counter. Neil saying there's no physical evidence, and we'll move from there. Go ahead, guys.
Again, the claim about the dating, and that would include dating actual physical texts and not later copies, would itself be
Yeah, this is the one, the Ketaf Hinnom, which is the one that I was quoting before. This is dated to, I want to say, 5th century BC. Yeah, they say 10th century BC. Kibret, I don't know how to pronounce this. Ostracon is similar to the scriptures like Exodus 23. These are again, we're talking what? This is, potentially 1,000 years before Christ. So they say Numbers 23, may Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh cause his face to shine upon you and grant peace. The Ketaf Hinnom, I think, is the oldest stuff, the oldest manuscripts that we have, dating to 419 BC. Almost certainly references instructions for keeping the feast of unleavened bread. So that's further back than what the Dead Sea Scrolls would be said. Dead Sea Scroll would be like 200 BC. Yeah, I don't know what his point is in saying this.
Subject to debate, and thus when he said that we didn't have examples of proverbs prior to a certain century, and I gave scholarly claims that there are proverbs that go back to the pre-monarchic period, Neil then said we don't have physical text. So he moved the goalpost away from scholarly claims to you have to have the physical copies. That's a fallacy to move the goalpost. And so that's what the point of the scholarly claims is, to say, Neil, if I give you counter scholarly claims and there's conservative scholars who date the text before what you would date them, what is the mechanism to know whose scholarly claims are correct? And your answer was to just reassert your position.
No, we take a holistic approach to this. So
how do we know that's the right way?
So not only, hold on, let me respond. Not only do we have no physical evidence, on top of that, we don't have, so for example, another thing that scholars do to test this out is let me finish I just let you talk. Let me talk. I'm not repeating my argument. I'm going to give you some more data. You
ignored my
One of the things we know about how we know if texts survive or go back far enough is things like naming. People name their children after heroes. After 400 BC, you start seeing names in the sources of Moses, Abraham, Noah, all the heroes from the Old Testament. Before that, there's zero. They don't have anyone with those names at all.
Well, hang on. Let me untangle this too. I'm sorry to step in here, guys, but I just got to make sure. So, I got your claim correct. You're talking about physical evidence, but Jay did give an argument to that, and I would like to hear what you have to say in regards to that argument, as he was addressing your argument of no physical evidence.
Restate the argument, perhaps.
You're saying you can come up with scholars who say that the more conservative scholars who dated past the pre-monarchic period. Yeah. I'd say where are they?
I just gave you one right there.
No, I would say where, how do you know this? Why are you just, because the linguists that I talk to say this is all circular, that they date a text, they go, Moses lived in 1200 BC. Right. Then they find a text in Hebrew that looks like it has the same linguistic. Hold on a second. They say they use axiom Moses is 1200 BC. Then they find, then they use that Hebrew from that text and say that's 1200 BC Hebrew. And they find another text that looks like that Hebrew and go, it's also 1200 BC.
Cool storytelling.
Circular reasoning.
Yeah, I mean, I do have to step in here. You are talking specifically to methodology here, and he's giving a specific argument that he wants contended with, and I do think it's fair. So you're saying we're at a lock here. You have your scholars, I have mine. Fair. You want to end it there? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the question is, you said that, well, if we have a competing claims of scholars thing going on, then
Yeah. By the way, they do the same thing with evolution as well. This is universally true with anything historic. When you date things historically, you got to find a point of reference. Even for evolution, they do the same thing. They find things that look like a certain rock layer or whatever, and they date it for that. This is unfortunately the artifact of doing historical research. You don't just have like everything in the world at your footstep. You have to you have to date it, and you have to take some level of a guess as is this more ancient or not. Now, the linguistic argument is stronger than Gnostic informant is making it out to be, because you could see development of language, right? You can know which version of language is more ancient and not. But at the same time, um he's kind of right that we don't have as much evidence as we would like to, and that might be artifact of time. You know what I mean? Prior to the Dead Sea Scrolls, we really only had post, like almost like New Testament and above, manuscripts of the Old Testament. So now we have Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that. So I mean, this is an artifact of just where we're at. I mean, like we would love to have more evidence, but this is what it is. Um, you can. No, no, yeah, you can. But what he's trying to do, Gnostic informant, is he's trying to establish that you could throw away things on the basis of linguistic evidence. And linguistic is a strong piece of evidence, right? Like linguistics is a great piece of evidence to know. Like you can actually track which version of a language is ancient, and you could be repair, because you speak Greek. You can know which Greek is more ancient based on how the words are being used, and you could see all kinds of developments, right? And I speak a few different languages, so my language goes back around the same time. Like my language is Tamil, and it goes back to um like 1,000 2,000 BC, and then it flows from there. And then you could see development, like at 600 BC, for example. You could see my language, there's changes, and then you see coming to the 300 AD, for example. During that period, 600 to 300 AD, you see changes. You could say, and it's a strong line of argumentation, but he's trying to throw all this stuff away. Gnostic informers just say, it's linguistics. Oh yeah, he's hand waving all that whole argument. Language is a really strong way to reason about evidence. It's a really strong way to reason about evidence. Um, like if I pick up a book right now and it says thee and thou, like, right? Like if it says these and thous, could you not actually date it very precisely to, right? That period of time, like 1700. Like, could you not date it to that period of time? Right? You could. You know what I mean? If someone has a slang that is only allowed in certain time periods, or present in certain time periods, you could date it there. So this guy's just hand waving the whole thing, like, yeah, it doesn't matter, but it does matter.
and it would just be going to the holistic approach. How do we know that the holistic approach is the right approach?
Because your scholars are just saying this text dates
That's
this
the two
period.
quote.
And the other one is actually the evidence of parts of Jeremiah. I forgot which chapters. Parts of Jeremiah, the prophecy, for example, quotes it quotes a different language. I want to say it's Aramaic, but it's a different language. But it's a Babylonian language. So that it's surrounding the time of the exile, right? Like you could know, because the Bible has, like, think about it, man. Like parts of the Bible is 1,000 years older than the other parts of the Bible. So you could know that these modes of languages, where they came from. Um, this is why even scholars have trouble translating some parts of the Bible, because they just don't know enough words to translate them. One of them is Elijah's chariots of fire. That we don't actually know what the word is, but we translate them as, he was come and taken up in chariots of fire. But we actually don't know what what exactly the word is over there.
The scholars I'm talking to, hold on, I'm not saying you have the same problem. I'm saying your scholars date the text of this period. I'm saying, how do they know that? Where the scholars I'm citing are going off archaeology. They're going off archaeology. They're going off namings. They're using the holistic.
That's why scholars say Didache is before 50, because I didn't know that. I know that Didache is very early. Yeah, because I actually think it's written around the time of the New Testament. It might have been a manual that was passed around the churches at the time, because it has instructions on how to baptize and things like that. It adds context in the New Testament, right? But I didn't know that. That's a good thing to say, because one of the things I bring up against people who are oneness people, they always make the case that the baptism is one name, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. I don't know if you know that. So when someone's debating that the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit are one, they'll say in the end of Matthew, it's one name, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then in Acts, it's always the name of Jesus. No one is ever baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. In Acts, it's always the name of Jesus. So in the Didache, it actually says, if you can't find running water, you can pour water 3 times. So it actually clarifies what that means, that we're, baptizing under, 3. So, and a lot of oneness people reject that because they think the Didache came when the church has already been corrupted, which is already dumb, like, to say that. But they think, like, by the time 80, 90 rolls around, they think it was already corrupted. The church had been corrupted, basically.
They're seeing that
that's
Jews
not
in that
addressing the
period.
argument. You're just
Hold on
telling
a
the
second.
story again.
Hold on a second.
You're talking about methodology.
Give him a chance, Jay. Give him a chance, Jay.
If the Jews before 400 BC are making graven images and doing things on Sabbath and eating pork, they're not Torah observant, right?
Can you state what my argument is about the holistic approach and what you think I'm arguing?
You can go ahead.
You've not understood the argument yet?
No, I don't. You think that what I'm doing is not, you're saying it's your argument versus mine, but I'm saying all you're going up.
Neil, no, that's not the argument.
What's the argument?
The argument is that when we have a contention about which scholars, and we're going to resolve it, I ask you, what would resolve this? How would we know whether it's conservative or liberal scholars or whatever, your scholars, my scholars? How would we resolve it? And you said we would go by the holistic approach. Okay. How do we know that that's the criteria to go to? That's the question. What's the proof? What's the good reason to believe that your arbitrary statement that it's the holistic thing?
Do you not know what the historical method is?
Again, how do we know that the holistic approach is the right way to go?
Because it follows the historical method, and we go off the data, and we have the best possible. We say this is the most likely scenario based on the evidence. This is the most likely scenario.
A holistic approach, surveying scholars, is not the same thing as the historical method. Those are two different questions.
Yes,
no, they're not.
These scholars who are applying the historical method.
One is consensus of scholars telling us.
I'm not talking about consensus of scholars.
Huh?
I'm not talking about the consensus of scholars.
You said it. We would go with the holistic approach.
Yes, I'm talking about, here's one scholar who's a linguist. Here's what he's saying. Here's what his reasons are. Here's another scholar who's an archaeologist. Here's another scholar who's a textual scholar.
Neil, you said holistic.
That's a holistic, and they're all applying the historical method. You don't do that. You just say the Bible's true.
Again, if they're using, all the scholars are using some form of a historical method, that's a deflection away from how do you know that the holistic approach is right?
So this is one thing that I haven't been able to get around yet. So most of our data on the Bible comes from post-exile, right? Like Ezra. Ezra is the one that actually wrote down our version of the Bible by tradition, post-exile. So there was a little bit of problems there. Like, I've had a couple of people who know about the data say, well, how do you know the Bible prior to the exile was kept intact, and then after the exile, how do you know that it was kept like through the whole period? And we don't have great evidence on that, other than linguistic evidence, right? Other than certain phrases carrying over, and other than linguistic evidence, we just actually we don't have a lot of evidence. So yeah, like, hey, look, I would love to have more data, but unfortunately we just don't have data. And a good example of this is Isaiah. So Isaiah, scholars split into 3 parts, right? Scholars split Isaiah into 3 parts, some into 2, but most into 3, because the latter part of Isaiah seems to be coming from post-exile, another prophet writing as Isaiah after the exile. Right? Now, part of that is because it mentions Cyrus and things like that. Part of that is they don't think prophecies can be fulfilled. So, they just have a worldview. But another one is a linguistic. And I don't have great evidence for all this stuff. I'm just saying this is all my mind thinking about this stuff. But like all of our prophecy about Jesus, like, chapter 40 all the way back to chapter 60, they would say comes from post-exile, another prophet writing under the name of Isaiah. You know what I mean?
And you're saying, no, I didn't actually mean a consensus. What did you mean by holistic?
I said you go to each of these study, each of these
So a consensus.
yeah, but it's not a consensus in all. These are different fields that you put together, and then you say, "Wait a minute."
That's
There's
called
not even. Not only is there no.
consensus doesn't have
Hold
to
on.
be a field
You say
specific.
we look at the
You
data
said-
and we
no, you said
conclude. Not
consensus
only is there no
is
evidence.
Hang on, Jay. Let him
No, it's
respond.
the
Let
opposite.
him respond. Go ahead.
Not only
Neil.
is there no evidence, it's the opposite.
Again, what is
So you have nothing, and I have
Neil,
a whole bunch of
Hang
data.
on,
How do
let,
we
let
know
Jay
that-
respond now.
holism is the criteria that we go with?
I just explained that.
No, how do we all know this?
Well, you don't have to know it, I guess, because you're just
How
going
does the
off what
audience
one
know
scholar.
this? You
You're just
asserted
going
it.
off what one scholar
You
said. I
asserted
just
it, Neil. How do
I
we-
just gave you the answer.
How does everyone in the audience following your argument
How do you know you're
that
not
your
bringing it back?
holism approach-
Hang on, Neil. Let him respond here. Go ahead, Jay.
Again, you keep circling back to listing various methodologies amongst different disciplines. That
Mhm.
doesn't tell me that a holistic approach of scholars amongst a bunch of different disciplines is the way to go.
Fine.
It's a non sequitur.
Then ignore it all. Go like this.
No, we
Plug your
don't-
ears and close your eyes to all the data around you. Do it. I don't
Neil,
care.
that's not what I'm arguing.
But hang
on. Move on.
Your
Rather
Hang on,
you
hang on,
believe
hang
in
on, hang on, guys. Neil, we can't. We're not going to operate in I don't care, right?
I'm just
I
saying.
would,
you
I
don't
would
have
like
to
a,
believe
I
it.
would like a response. Just as you gave an argument to Jay's responding to your argument, is making an argument back. I would actually like the response to the argument. I'll hold his feet to the same fire if I see he's not responding to an argument. So I would like you to actually respond to his argument, please.
You said that I have a scholar right here from this book that says that the books of Solomon go back to the pre-monarchical period, which would be 1000 BC plus. Wow, that's a crazy claim from my experience with scholarship. That's pretty fringe. I would say, how do you know that? So I'd have to ask him how he knows that, what his evidence is, why he's making that conclusion. And then I would go to other scholars in archaeology. I'll go to scholars in textual criticism, scholars who do linguistics, scholars who study Egypt, scholars who study, and I would go and find all the data and say, wait a minute, where is the evidence for the Torah? If it's not there,
fundamentally
then
you're
I do
not understanding that it's an epistemic question. I'm not asking you, can you list a bunch of scholars that are liberal scholars?
empirical
for a lot of
data.
disciplines?
That's
I
how I
understand.
know.
Neil, stop interrupting me because it's a really clear, simple argument. I don't dispute that people go and look at other scholars in other disciplines.
Mhm.
Your resolution to the challenge of competing scholarly claims was, quote, go to the holistic approach. Maybe that is true. And all I'm saying is, how do we know that that's the way to resolve it? Because, sometimes,
How do you know?
Neil, that's a tu quoque.
I don't care. I'm committing to Coco. I want to know how
Thank
you know.
you. He's admitting that he's doing
I'm
quoque.
admitting it. How do you know, Jay?
Well, I don't have the problem of
Oh,
competing
you don't have the
because I
problem.
don't accept.
So you
I
don't even
accept-
have to know.
I-
You just
stop.
accept that it's true.
I don't accept that holistic ad hoc agree with scholars or followed by just Neil saying.
And I don't just reject. I'm sorry, I cut you off. Are you done?
No, it's not resolved by an arbitrary ad hoc principle of it's just holistic. Okay, maybe that's true, Neil. Maybe we do go to a holistic thing, but what does that actually mean? And why ought we think that that's true? Maybe it is true, but I need a good reason to believe it's true. Your answer to that was just to give a bunch of methodologies that are used. That doesn't tell me that holism is the right approach. Maybe it is.
Okay. And I would even respond to that and say, I don't just deny conservative scholars because I don't like what they're saying. I accept. I'm convinced by Christian
you
scholars
did a
all the
minute
time.
But you
I
did.
don't- well, you didn't give me a reason why he says that. He just wrote it down. So what? How did he make that? How did he come to that conclusion?
Well,
I need
Neil,
to
I
know
could
that.
say that your liberal scholars just wrote it down.
Well, let
so
me give
you
you an
do
example.
reject conservative scholars. You just did.
Dr. Schmidt, who just came out with published a book about Josephus saying it's authentic. I was convinced by some of his arguments. He made good arguments off the Greek. He demonstrated why he made his arguments that
What does
Josephus.
that have to do with?
I'm just showing you it's not. I'm not just denying scholars because they're conservative Christians.
Okay, but in this
If
case,
they bring arguments
I
that
don't
the
even know
data, they bring arguments that supportive of the data, I'll be convinced of it. It just doesn't happen to the point where
epistemic questions are prior to scientific questions. Is the
I
problem?
know that.
Huh?
I know that.
You do.
You're saying our
Then why didn't you
worldview as
answer
a
the
whole,
question about holism and how do we know that that's the right way?
because my worldview accounts for things like being objective is
Okay, and
Yeah.
maybe it does, but why ought we to think that holism is the right approach here? You just admitted that some scholars can be in the minority and be correct,
why
right?
ought because we want to follow the data to its final conclusion to the most
No, but again,
Hold
you're
on.
missing the point. How does that, what you're saying there, tell me that holism is the right approach? Maybe it is. How about what is the basis for that?
because that's how we discover things in the world.
So that's just restating the thing.
Empiricist. Well, you just asked me a question. That's
So like the way you figure out something in life is like you how do you know empiricism is true? You use empiricism to figure out that empiricism is true. What is he saying? I don't understand.
the answer to it.
He's not justifying this. He's just saying this is what we do. Gnostic informant is not actually making a claim of what we're doing. He's just saying, well, this is what we do. This is what's, he's using the word, and I don't know what he wants to say. He wants to say this is reliable. This is a reliable way to find truth. But in the debate, Jay's not going to grant that.
So the answer is just a circle?
How's that a circle?
Because the thing in question is an epistemic issue, and you're saying that, well, we'll just be an empiricist. How does that resolve that holism?
Yeah,
is the
we
right answer?
follow the most rigorous
Neil,
methodologies.
can't-
That's how we discover things in the
Again,
world. Is that
it's
not
the
true or
question.
no?
So the rigorous one is the one that's your position?
Yeah, the rigorous methodology.
Well, again, so it's just
Why wouldn't
restating
it be?
that you just
Why
follow me.
wouldn't it be?
So you're just saying follow me.
So I'm not saying me. I'm not saying.
You just
don't
said the
you?
rigorous
When you,
position. I
have
asked you
you ever
yours
had a
was-
family member that had cancer?
What?
Ever? You know anyone that ever had cancer?
Neil, you
Do
just
they
said your
go
position
to
is
a
the
witch
rigorous
doctor?
one.
Do they pray?
Hang on, hang on. This is becoming a series of non
Because no, this is
sequiturs.
actually. I'm actually making a point here. You
Okay,
go to
hang on, Neil. I'll allow the point. But if it's becoming a non sequitur and we're not getting
Sure.
to the answer to this question, then I'm going to step in. So go ahead.
Okay. When someone has cancer, they don't just go to their own devices or ask if pray about it or go to the witch doctor down the street. They go to the best experts.
This is just
whether
assuming empiricism to prove empiricism, right? Like this is like I did an empirical thing and it worked, and it's also a form of pragmatism. He's not actually demonstrating that this is the truth, or he's not grounding that truth in anything. He's just saying, well, I can go and I can see this, and then it works. But how do you know it works? Because I went and did it. It's begging the question in the very premise, in the very conclusion. So he's like, how do you know empiricism is true? Well, try empiricism and then you'll know it's true. Okay. I mean, I guess the Eastern Orthodox guys could say, well, try the divine liturgy and you could know that it is true. Right? Like you could make that claim about anything at that point. Like you could say, try Christianity and then you could know it's true. Right? Like why try empiricism and then know only that is true?
it's the hospital PhDs or Roswell Institute, something where there's literal experts who know what they're doing. They want the best experts that are out there who have the best credentials, period. And you can use that. You can see the same thing for all these other fields.
No, like this again, like he's talking about things that are observant, materially true in the world right now versus difference and then it's different when you're using historical methods to determine whether it's probabilistically true, whether it probably happened in the past. And that's not the same thing.
Of study, and not just medicine, but even history, even things like the humanities. The same thing applies.
Okay. Is it possible that sometimes the scholarship that's conservative is in the minority and could be correct, like you said with the guy about Josephus?
Yeah.
Okay. So that makes my point that scholarly consensus and holism isn't going to be a reliable way to go about it.
Well, when it comes to the Bible, the consensus usually leans in the direction of most of the scholars that are in the field.
Neil, I'm asking you why we should follow holism and consensus.
I'm not talking about consensus. I'm talking about
You
the
just said
experts
consensus.
in particular fields.
Hang on,
You
but
just
this is
said
the question. This is the question at hand that Jay has asked this argument now twice, and I think it's fair to answer to it. He's asking, he's asking the ought claim, and I'd like you to respond to the ought claim.
That's why I brought up the cancer thing. You go to the experts in the particular field who are the most well.
But historical study is not like cancer, right? Like when you go, okay, when you're going to someone who is literally healing you as a doctor and giving you medicine, you could observe the effects. You can't. That doesn't follow for someone who's like an Egyptologist and like only look at whatever the Egyptologist says. It might be true. It might not be true. You need a different method. And Jay's push here, he's just kind of lingering here, probably, I would say. But it's correct to push. Like, it's not the same kind of thing. Don't, like, gender studies is not medicine. You know what I mean? It's not the same kind of thing. And so you can't just be like, yeah, go to the doctor and whatever the doctor says. No, what if the doctor is wrong? You could have a second opinion. You could have all kinds of things that happen. But yes, at some point there are established methods of doing things like medicines and things like that. But that's so different than whether the Bible is true or not in history.
The most well established who know what they're doing.
Neil, the question is, how do we know that we ought to go to the holistic approach or a consensus?
Because if you want to be right, you do it. If you want to be right, you do it. If you want to be right or wrong.
The question is, how do we know that that's the right approach that we ought to take?
Well, no, it's a fair point.
He just doesn't have an answer. Like, it's true. He just doesn't have an answer.
But I would like to hear the counter evidence.
So you don't have an argument.
It's not a too quick way.
Hang on. To be fair, to be totally fair. Okay, well, Neil, to be totally fair here, that is not actually answering the argument. That's asking him to now state a position.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's fair for you to answer to the argument that he's making. I would make him answer to yours as well, like I have.
It just did though.
Okay.
I mean, if
do you want to move on to another topic, maybe?
Yeah.
This is just kind of going around.
You don't have to follow the expert. You can follow the conservative scholars. Fine.
Okay.
Again, I'm not even, it's an epistemic question about how do we
You're
know
asking
the
about
holism is
thoughts
the
and
right
stuff,
approach.
and
I
and
gave you a
you-
counter, Neil, I gave you a counter to why sometimes consensus is wrong. And you admitted
is.
that can happen. And
Yeah.
so I'm asking you, how do we know then that we should follow the consensus?
I just told you.
Okay. Do you want to move on to, I'd like to
Yeah.
ask you about, because you made a big deal about, the evil God of the Old Testament and his actions. Isn't it just the case that if infants are dashed against stones, wouldn't, in your worldview, that just be the one manifesting?
No, because in this material realm, we are farthest away from the one, and because of the flux of our reality, things can like this do happen. So the one has a will, but we
Wait, the one has a will? How could an impersonal force have a will? A will requires a mind. What? What is he talking about?
farthest away from the one, which is where the flux is, there are opposing forces that do things that we, even if we have a piece of the one within us, and that which is our full potentiality, our telos, if you will, Aristotle's phrase that you also use in your worldview. Sometimes people don't follow that and they do evil things because we're in the flux. We don't all have direct access to the good. That's the problem of evil solved by my worldview. Your worldview just says God let Satan do it.
So what things in this lower dimension are good or evil?
Whatever's whatever's in appliance with virtue.
How do we know what are the virtues?
So those have been debated over time through the dialectic, through the Socratic method, and we have texts that talk about the virtues, like the golden sentences.
So we don't know.
No, we do.
Okay,
they're debated, but
like, do we go with the consensus again?
Honesty,
the Platonic
honor.
consensus.
What?
Honesty?
Yeah.
Okay. How do we know that? I thought you said earlier it was just virtue, right?
Yeah, because
he's just like honesty. I like that.
we can come up with things that lead to virtue. That's the highest of the pinnacle of good.
And
virtue is the highest good.
Okay.
Then there are other principles that are good that lead to virtue, like being honest.
Right. And what's the epistemic justification for knowing that?
My worldview accounts for it.
I just love that. I'm just gonna start saying, what is the epistemic justification for that every time now? What is the epistemic justification for what you just said? And then the answer is always my worldview accounts for it.
No. How do we know that within your worldview, honesty is the key one?
Because it leads to virtue.
But honesty was supposed to be the virtue. Isn't it one of the virtues? Honesty leads to itself.
It leads to virtue. It's virtue is the highest. Virtue is the highest good you can attain.
Honesty is a virtue. You don't know that?
Yes.
So honesty leads to honesty?
No, it's one of the lesser virtues that leads to capital V.
How do you know the gradation? How do you know which ones are lower and higher?
Well, because there's different ways to debate this. Negation we can use. We can debate it. We can
How
talk
does
about
negating tell you that honesty is a lower virtue than another?
We can talk. I just said
we can debate it. What is he? See ya, brother. What is he talking about? We can debate what? What are we debating? Whether honesty or love is higher or lower? Yeah, without God, how do you know the proper order of anything, of truth or of virtue, of morality? How do you know that? You don't. I mean, you could reason some way, but we're all going to arrive at fundamentally different moral systems, right? And you can actually demonstrate that human beings almost always create selfish moral systems, right? Like they always try to create moral systems that exempt them, right? And if you ask someone, for example, and this is a great way to kind of think about it, right? Is it right to not look at is it right not to lust, for example, right? Human beings will generally say, oh well, kind of, sort of. The reason is because they're trying to excuse themselves, because everyone has done that at one point. So when Jesus says that, it is a declaration of this is right and wrong, as his divine being is saying that. So without God, we literally cannot know what is a moral right and wrong, because we will just constantly be excusing ourselves, right? Like, who will want to make a law that will condemn themselves? Nobody's going to make a law that will condemn themselves. If someone says we should throw away I've seen this actually firsthand, we should get rid of all the unalivers. We should yeah, unalivers, man, they're going straight down under. And then I say, well, all right, yeah, they're going down under. What about like people who do this crazy thing, that crazy thing? I've seen people say, yeah, they should go down under. And say, what about liars? Well, they'll start making excuses, because we will always be trying to make a law that would suit us, yeah, right? So I don't know that you can assent to this with reason.
We debate and we negate. We figure
What
out
does
what is not
debating
good.
tell you that?
Knowing what not is good, what is not good.
What is the
figure out what
epistemic
is good.
principle that we're
I just
supposed to
gave it.
follow?
I just told you.
No, you didn't. You said debating. That's a thing that people
That's
do.
the same thing you
That's
do.
not an epistemic principle. It's an action.
Yeah, but that's how we figured these things out over time.
So that's a
No,
method.
but no,
It's not a principle.
Well, the principle is having the dogma of attaining virtue. That's
So
the principle.
wait a minute. I thought you were about reason, and now you're saying it's dogma.
Yeah, the only dogma.
Why should we
the
accept your
Platonist-
dogma?
The only plate.
It's about reason that he changed that to dogma. Dogma is a religious statement. It's a statement of absolute. How can you reason yourself to a dogma like that? And on what basis can you even have a dogma in their worldview? I don't get it. How can you declare anything as dogma? Because nothing is revealed. So dogma is, kind of restating a revealed truth. And how can you do that?
Is that virtue that the only dogma that Platonists hold is attaining virtue.
Yeah, but
Virtue is the highest good. That's
you
it. Because if you have more than one
honesty
dogma,
is one of
if you
the
have more than one
virtues.
dogma, you end up conflicting at some point.
Neil, this is all just gibberish sophistry.
No, it's not.
Honesty is
This
one
is
of
all-
the
this is what the
virtues.
Neoplatonists wrote. This is what the Neoplatonists wrote.
That's an appeal to authority. Who cares?
I'm just saying. If you're saying it's all nonsense, this has been written about
No,
for thousands
but
of years.
so what? There's a lot of ancient writers that wrote nonsense, right?
I'm just giving you the answers.
Okay, so what we need is good reasons to know that honesty is the one that leads us to the higher virtues. How do we
my
know that?
My worldview isn't in contradiction like yours is.
That's
So
a two-quote
we're debating. No, it's
That
not.
is a
We're
two-quote
debating
way.
who's
I'm
more
asking
coherent.
Yeah, so
just
what?
explain to me. I
No,
want to
my
be,
worldview is
wanna
more
be
coherent
independent.
than yours, so that's why people should listen to me over you.
Fine. Let's say Christianity is contradictory. What is the reason that we ought to believe that honesty is the virtue that leads to the highest virtues?
Because you haven't demonstrated any other worldview to be better.
Because I haven't done something? What?
Yes.
No, I'm asking from your worldview. What's the epistemic principle here?
Because of the predictive success and for example.
How does honesty give predictive success?
Well, no, hold on a second. When we look back in history, we can see where
So his entire worldview is just basically empiricism. It's all just empiricism. At the end of the day, it's just, you can go verify this. And you can't verify this, by the way. You can't verify that honesty is necessarily better than, being dishonest. There's lots of situations where being dishonest could be quote unquote better, because what is better? What does it mean to be better? You know what I mean? Can you measure it? Can you test it? For us, we could say, what does it mean to be better is to be aligned to the will of God. Whatever God has revealed, that is what it means to be better. But how could this guy even say any of that stuff? That's why it's always a circle. Like you said, guy, like it's just absolutely just a circle. He's just gonna keep going into a circle. Well, you gotta test it, you gotta know which one's better. How do you know which one's better? Well, it leads to better outcomes. Well, according to who? Well, according to me, are you the only one that matters? No, we gotta think about other people too. So how do you know it leads to other people? Like they're gonna keep rolling down this path.
wherever these Platonists were, there was renaissances. So when they were kicked out of Constantinople, hold on a second, I'm going to make a point here. They were kicked out of Constantinople after having the greatest empire ever, the Roman Empire, inheriting things from the Greeks, the greatest, the Pax Romana, all the way up to the late antiquity. They become Christian. They kick the Platonists out. They go to the east. They go to Babylon, and then they even lead to a quote unquote Islamic golden age because they're reading the text of Aristotle.
Did you measure that
when they
scientifically?
when they come back to Macedonia, when they come back to business, there's a Macedonian mini Renaissance, and then there's another Renaissance in Italy.
Did you measure that scientifically?
When we can look at history, and
No,
say,
that's arbitrary.
okay, let me ask
How do
you
we know
this.
your criteria?
Aristotle and
Neil, how do we
Galen.
know your criteria of a successful society is correct? Because we're asking
It's my
about
worldview.
virtue, which
My
would be
worldview.
the basis for what the successful society is. So it's a circle.
Sure. Okay. So let me ask you this: Aristotle and Galen.
Huh?
Aristotle and Galen. You know who they are?
Uh-huh.
So Galen was the textbook for medical text. He was written in the 2nd century AD. Aristotle's 4th century BC.
Aristotle's not a Neoplatonist.
Well, actually, Middle Platonists and Neoplatonists and later Platonists take Aristotle
I'm
and
aware.
merge it
But
with.
it's- but
So
what
we
does
can
it do-
we
what
use
does it do with
Aristotle.
Aristotle?
So I'm not talking. We use Aristotle. You're wrong. So what
No,
I'm
I didn't
saying
say-
is,
how am I wrong? He's not a Neoplatonist.
I didn't say he
That's
was. I said we use Aristotle either way.
How
I'm
is
not
Aristotle going to prove Neoplatonism?
I'm showing you Aristotle's works and Galen's works were the central textbooks for medical science and
I'm aware. Yeah.
and science all the way up until the 16th century.
How does medical science lead to virtue, though? It doesn't. What
But how does that prove Neoplatonism?
does that have to do with anything?
Because Christianity couldn't do anything to improve on that.
How
We had
does
to go. We had to wait till we had to wait till my worldview was back.
Christianity
We had to wait till my worldview was
Neil,
back
that's a
for things to
fallacy.
get. No, it's
Neil,
not.
That's a fallacy.
How?
Yeah.
How?
Say, well, Christianity couldn't do this is not answering the question of how do we know that because Aristotle.
You're
and
asking about
Galen-
worldviews.
Neil,
I'm showing you.
how do we know that proves? The question was about proving Neoplatonism, and you said, well, Aristotle did some good things, and then Galen wrote some medical stuff, and Christianity couldn't do it. That doesn't prove Neoplatonism. That's a
Christianity
non
couldn't
sequitur.
improve on these basic science texts. And then
Neil,
as
how
the
does
16th
that prove Neoplatonism from Aristotle and Galen? This is ridiculous.
because we're doing a worldview versus
Aristotle
worldview
and
debate,
Galen
right?
weren't Neoplatonists.
We're doing a worldview versus worldview
No,
debate, right?
they weren't
Which one's
Neoplatonists.
more
So what does
coherent?
it have to do with proving
Because
Neoplatonism?
my worldview is more coherent than
But
yours.
they're
Jay.
not Neoplatonists.
I didn't say they were. Why are
It's
you being
irrelevant.
bad faith?
Then it's irrelevant.
Neoplatonists draw from Galen and Aristotle. Much of you defending things like God being jealous or God not being omniscient or not even being omnipotent. For example, when the iron chariots came and in Judges, the tribe of Judah got wiped out. Well, doesn't that show God's not all powerful? What's the response to that?
No, there's often statements that explain why they lost, and in every case, God explains that you lose when you're wicked. But by the way, you said that it's okay. You said it's okay if jealousy is used. Well, why
Hold on.
cannot the word?
You made a point
Neil.
there. I'm doing the cross examination here. Hold on a second.
You're not letting me answer.
Judges, but you want to move on to
No, I'm not. I'm explaining.
Okay, finish your point. Go ahead.
Okay. So again, the anthropomorphic language. Again, if God says something like He's jealous, you said, okay, fine. You could say maybe that's anthropomorphic earlier, but if jealousy can be anthropomorphic, as you admitted, then regret can as well. So I think that clears up the jealousy and regret issue. But when God says that you will lose your battles, this is explained in Deuteronomy that you will be trodden upon when you're wicked. So it's not because of a lack of.
Say they're wicked.
In Deuteronomy, when there's covenant sanctions, God warns them and He says, let me finish. So if you are wicked, you will lose your battles and be trodden upon. So what I'm saying is that when there's an explanation like that, it doesn't mean anything close to denying divine omniscience. It just means that the reason that they were defeated was because of this, but ultimately because of God punishing them.
Okay, I'm talking about Judges, not talking about Deuteronomy. It specifically says, Judges 1:19, Yahweh or the Lord. It's my turn, dude.
It doesn't matter if it's Judges because that's
it
referred to wisdom.
Okay, so I feel like we've kind of come to the end of we kind of come to the end of a lot of this. I thought this would have been a better debate. I don't know. Let me see if there's anything else that is in the debate that I just want to finish up responding to before I leave. So let's see.
The reason I was saying that about with holism earlier was
being unfair at certain points, then I did my hearing. Be better for
the penal sanctions in Deuteronomy.
Yeah, okay. So it's basically just a bunch of whatchamacallit, like I don't like this, I don't like that, moral problems with the Bible. We've addressed, like, Christians have addressed all of that stuff over and over and over again. If you want to know, like I said, the Skeptics Annotated Bible, and then there's a response to the Skeptics Annotated Bible. I forgot the name of it. I can post it at some point. But it just lists the entire. I don't know. Everyone has made their problems about the Bible, and then we've responded to all the problems, and given our responses. Some of them have multiple responses. So I don't know. This is just a little bit. It's a little bit silly at some point. It becomes into just not a formal argument. It's like, I don't like this. I don't like the way this goes. I don't like the way that goes. Okay, you don't like it. You don't like it. But if God is God, He can do what He pleases. He can say, I'm going to make an exodus happen, and He can go and He can, wipe out a nation, and then that rebellious nation. If Egypt is being rebellious, God can wipe out Egypt and say, all right, you're done. I'm going to bring out my people, and that's the end of that. So a lot of Christian theology also reasons from Christ outward. It doesn't reason, let's go to Genesis and prove Genesis. Let's go to Exodus and prove Exodus. It goes, let's see Christ. Christ is the center, and then out of Christ, the rest of that happens. And there's a good reason for that, because after the Christian faith comes about, we have such a explosion of Christianity in the world and the knowledge of the Jewish religion in the world. So, yeah, like I said, Skeptics Annotated Bible is generally, I'll actually show you like what kind of contradictions they're gonna bring up. It's like random stuff. Like, for example, right? Like at the end of the 10 Commandments, they'll say, absurdity. These are absurds. Contradictions, right? Like these are like a list of contradictions. Oh yeah. God gives instructions for killing and burning animals. He says that if we make such burnt offerings, he will bless us for it. What kind of mind would be pleased by the killing and burning of innocent animals, right? And then that's, so they give like a list of these contradictions. If you guys, just want to go through them at some point. I've been through a lot of them. They're very similar. You know what I mean? So they're very like, you know, like if you want to talk about, here you go, cruelty. For example, cruelty. You'll find all the verses about the problems they have about cruelty, and they actually have good stuff too. But yeah, like the contradictions, that's an interesting thing. So you can go to a book of the Bible, and they'll give you what all their contradictions are. So, um, you know, it's sort of a comprehensive list of stuff that the uh, atheists have complained about. So this is a good resource that I have. Um, but yeah, I thought it was an okay debate. I would probably say, I don't know, 5 out of 10. As far as substance is concerned, I think Jay obviously came out on top. I think Jay definitely came out on top just because I just think he knows the content better. I think Gnostic Informant, he didn't seem to hold his own, and he didn't seem to cover all of his argument. There were times he rebutted Jay very well, especially the scholarship period. He did pull back quite a bit, but I feel like in overall in the debate, Jay just held his own much better. You know what I mean? Hey, the Trinity is a contradiction. No, it's not, and he knows when to respond to stuff. You know what I mean? That's what I like about Jay, is the fact that Jay knows when to respond to stuff, when not to respond to stuff. So, um, I thought it was good. I thought it was a good debate. Unfortunately, the atheists have not presented a lot of good arguments in the recent times, because I think the Christians pretty much have just caught up to all the arguments of atheists. I don't think tag has been really refuted. So even now, I don't think the tag was even addressed, refuted, any of that stuff. So I don't, you know, tag still lives on. The first cause argument still lives on. Teleological argument still lives on. Like all these arguments are still there, and the atheists really haven't done to refute those arguments. They've just said, we don't like this. We don't like the Bible. We don't like these kinds of things. We don't like these prohibitions. Um, it's not an argument. And at some point we'll probably go to secular humanism and see what that says, but it really just borrows Christianity. Like it just comes into Christianity, borrows Christianity. We don't believe in this. We believe Christian morals without Christianity. Basically, is all that says. Um, you know what I mean? And it all comes to the principle of harm, like don't cause unnecessary harm. And then that is a very ambiguous moral principle. So yeah, I mean, like I said, substance wise, 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10. I think Jay came out on top. He did a good job. Yeah, I don't know. There's no other great debates going around nowadays. There is an apostolic succession debate that just happened. I think at some point we'll cover it, but it wasn't so much content. It was kind of a short debate between Alex Zorn and Aaron Gallagher. Aaron Gallagher is a Church of Christ, and Alex Zorn is obviously Eastern Orthodox. I thought it was an okay debate. But the cross X for Aaron on Alex, man, that was a killer. That was a killer, man. That was tough, basically. Okay, so like I said, I don't have anything else pulled up. Like I said, I thought that this would be a better debate. I will hold on. I did appear on Think Debates, which is Joel Steelcase's debate channel a couple of days ago, and I can just play that for you guys and then call it quits. I thought it was an interesting interaction that I had with Joel. I like Joel. I have nothing wrong with no problem with Joel, but I just thought it was an interesting interaction that I had with Joel. Basically, I tried to make the monadic argument. My contention is that I think tag is an unhelpful thing. It's an okay argument. It's an unhelpful one. And so I come in right around here in Joel's live stream about presuppositional apologetics. So I'll actually just review it. It's kind of weird me reviewing me, but I don't know. I don't have another thing to review. So
accessed
Right.
they're accessed through a priori reasoning, which means before we interact with the world.
Yeah, just you questioning if they could be different is relying upon them.
Right. So that's why that's not a good comparison, trying to compare principles of biology. If they were the same kind of thing, I would totally grant his thought experiment there, but they're not. A priori not.
Who
Okay.
has been telling Twitchy that he's just going to absolutely cook you. I don't know. And
Bro, Johnny don't want this smoke, man. He just crazy.
no, but he's been patiently waiting. He actually gave up his spot for naturalism enjoyer, so he's been waiting extra long.
hey, how you guys doing?
Doing
Nice
great,
to meet
man.
you,
How are
man.
you?
Johnny, what's up,
I'm
bro?
good. Hey, bro. How you doing? How you doing, Twitchy? Hey, I don't want to take up too much of you guys' time.
Well, there's no one backstage right now.
Okay.
If someone wants to get maybe the last debate in, who knows time-wise, but if you want to get a debate in, now is the best time to join because you'll be up right after Z is done here.
Oh yeah. Okay. So, I'm a friendly, so you guys don't have to worry too much about
Right on.
in there. And
I'm
made
sure we
sure
can find something that we could yell at each other.
Yeah. I'm sure we can figure something
We'll
out.
see how friendly you
We'll
are.
see how friendly we get.
Yeah.
And I'm a friend of HHS, so yeah, we'll set up some stuff. But
HHS name.
I will tell you one thing. I've done a lot of apologetics, read Pushing the Antithesis by Greg Bonson, and I kind of have a problem with tag for the exact reason of the last conversation, is that it's not that it's necessarily false, although I can find certain things to it, which I'll bring up right now. Is that one, it's just very unhelpful because most atheists just are not following along with tag. That would be my first kind of problem with tag. I'm more on Sproul. Sproul made the case that presupposition, evidentialism creates inescapable realities when you give people evidence rather than presup. Presup, what it does is creates a non sequitur in the mind of people that even if you say you have to ground all these things, people just don't care. Like they don't think like that. And then the third one is this, which is the biggest defeater, I think, is that I can make presup work with deism. I do not need the God of the Bible to make it work, and I could just go to the same proof. I could just ground it in a deistic God. Like I'm from India, so Brahma would be just an absolute force in the universe, more of a deistic entity, and I could just make the same case with tag without presupposing Yahweh.
Can I? I'm going to let Joe handle most of this because he's the presuppositional expert, definitely a tag expert. But according to my understanding, and Joe, please correct me if I'm wrong. Presuppositional apologetics isn't against the use of evidence; it's against the use of evidence in a neutral ground. So that's why when I was engaging 3 or 4 debates ago or whatever, I was trying to. I used the more evidential teleological argument of look at the way the world works. You wouldn't see a Lowe's blow up and expect all of this. Expect it to create a house, right? But I grounded that in the presupposition that the Bible is true. So I don't think that you necessarily have to conclude that presup is only tag and we just completely discard the evidence. But it's saying that we're going to take the evidential arguments, but we're going to ground them in Scripture because we're not going to give up. We're not going to step into neutral ground. We're going to say this is what the Bible says. Oh, and look, that proves it right there, or there's an example of it.
Am
I right with that, Joel? Or
Sorry, say that again. Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Repeat yourself.
Repeat all that again.
The entire thing that you just said. No.
Verbatim.
Yeah. Presuppositionalism is definitely not against evidence in any way, shape, or form. The great thing about presuppositionalism is that everything is evidence for God. Everything is evidence. If you squeeze the toothpaste tube this morning, that's evidence for God. You presupposed induction and uniformity in nature because you assumed that it was going to work the same way that it did yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm
going to raise some objections as we go, Joel, and then if you want to just respond to what I've said so far.
Yes. So what you said was that tag is unhelpful, and that evidentialism leads to inescapable realities. I think you definitely use the word.
That's R.C. Sproul. Yeah, he says like when you give someone evidence. Yeah. So what I meant by this is when you give someone a piece of evidence, they kind of have to deal with it. You know what I mean? Like if you say, hey, you don't have a way to ground the laws of logic. People are like, okay, I don't care about that. You know what I mean? When you give them a piece of evidence, like, something like the evidence for the resurrection, right? They have to deal with that because it's a positive claim about something that, it's tangible. That's what I mean by that. It doesn't mean that, they couldn't suppress it. That's not what that means. It's like when Romans 1 says, the invisible attributes of God is evidenced, right? It's there in creation, right? Like, so that no one is without excuse. That's what I was talking about. Is like when you look at creation, it's impossible to come out saying there is no God. So it's an inescapable reality in the sense that you have to deal with it. It is.
No,
It is
that's
inescapable for them.
I do have to interrupt. I'm so sorry because I
Please.
completely forgot to do this. And they don't have anything to say. They were just donating. So left-handed assassin with 2 in the stream, probably not too long from now.
Yeah.
So if you want to see us next week, get in those last $10. We appreciate all of the support.
I
Sorry about that,
refuse to quit until we get the $10 more.
You heard
guys.
it.
Heard it here.
And he's got that Shekinah glory glowing on his face there when he
you
says
stood
it.
up.
Yeah.
Look
I
at
had to stand up and go get something to eat because
Listen,
these streams take it out of me.
that. I hear you, man. I know. Okay, so yeah, no, the as I understand evidentialism, it absolutely does not lead to inescapable, unless you just mean like really, really compelling or very convincing conclusions. It doesn't lead to inescapable realities, because evidentialism, the best that it can do is lead to probabilistic conclusions. And the God that we believe in is not a probability. If God is probably there, then God is probably not there. There's a probability that he's not there. If there's even 1% possibility that God is not there, then that's a probability that the God of the Bible doesn't exist. And that's just not what the Bible says about God. God is necessary. God is the God who is there. He's inescapable. He would be there if none of us were there. So that's just not the God that we believe in. It's not what the God that the Bible teaches. And we shouldn't present God as a probability. We don't believe that God is a probability. We don't go to church on Sunday and sing Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that probably saved a wretch like me. Like I might have been a wretch, probably. I've been convinced that by the preponderance of the evidence that I was a wretch. No, we believe what the Bible says. And then from there, we reach these conclusions. And so if you don't like tag, I would still say that's not a reason for throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because Jesus himself argued presuppositionally, as did Paul. And so in fact, that's how Jesus argued, is presuppositionally. Matthew 12, I think, is a great example. He uses presuppositional arguments twice in Matthew 12. So yeah, so we shouldn't present God as a matter of probability. As much as I love evidence and as much as I love philosophical arguments, that's not the foundation of our faith, and we shouldn't present it as such. Like if you received evidence that Jesus Christ didn't rise from the dead, would you lose your faith?
No, but I mean, I think evidentialism would be just the other side, like what William Lane Craig does, where it's just argument for contingency or first cause or those kinds of arguments, and then he establishes that rather than tag, which just presupposes it. But we can kind of gloss over that. I'll agree that there's a strength to saying, hey, we're not going to make the atheist a judge and put them in the judge's seat. I'll kind of grant that. What do you think about the deist? If I can just pretend to be a deist.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I also wanted to take issue with what you said about Brahman being equivalent to a deist God. I don't think that is a great comparison at all. Brahman is Atman. Brahman is everything. Brahman is the impersonal.
Yeah, Brahman is more Platonistic kind of concept there.
All-encompassing monad. So, and that's not the same thing as a deist God.
Sure, but I just mean, okay, let's just kind of Occam's razor it, a universal mind. God is just a universal mind.
Well,
one
question that I want to know is how did you find out about this universal mind?
Oh, it wouldn't matter. I'm presupposing it.
Why?
To make the logical absolutes grounded.
Did this universal mind reveal itself to you?
Through the laws of logic, yeah.
Okay, can you explain that?
Yeah, because otherwise, if I go down whether the laws of logic are material or conceptual, I would have to say they're conceptual and they require universal mind, and therefore the universal mind exists.
How many laws of logic are there?
3.
Do they exist necessarily?
So I will bring up para contra logic with you, but let's just say for now, yeah, they do.
Okay.
Like for example, like para contra would be, and this is one of the things the problem I have with tag is like.
Hold on, that's different. Don't go down there yet. I want
there are logicians that reject excluded middle, for example, but para contra logic is just things like when you say, like, for example, this statement is false, right? Like, is that statement true or is that statement false, right? It kind of tests the law of logic or the excluded middle, the law of excluded middle. Grant that. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to go down this deism route.
Sure. Go ahead.
All right, so go ahead.
The 3 laws are necessary.
They necessarily exist.
All right. So logic has threeness. Logic has the attribute of being 3. There's 3 laws of logic. How does threeness exist in a
logic doesn't have threeness. It is like there are 3, but it doesn't have threeness in that. If you mean that threeness exists as a universal that logic takes on, that's not true.
Okay. does logic have diversity within itself, such that you can distinguish between the three laws of logic?
You mean like are they distinct in a way that they don't collapse into the same? Because if you presuppose the identity, you
Yes,
then
that's
can
what I mean.
presuppose the rest of them. Yeah, they do have distinction, but
Right.
identity is the foundation, and then it builds on the rest of build on it. Yeah.
Well, so my question would be, how does a monad or a Unitarian God ground both unity and distinction?
Yeah, this is not a formal problem. Like, this is my contention with tag in general, is that if God has a thought to create, like if God is a singular mind, he could just have a thought, and then he could have a second thought, and those two thoughts can be distinct, and they don't collapse it because there's no distinction. Distinction doesn't need to be grounded in essence in order for it to be true. You know what I mean? Distinction can exist just by the very nature that God can have things like a thought and a second thought, and those two things are distinct. He doesn't have to ground it in his own being for that to be true. By just through his mind. Why do I need to explain the mind in order to just ground it in him?
That's up to you to explain. A God who creates, and if he has aseity, if he is ase, he
Aseity means self-existence.
exists unto himself, meaning there's nothing alongside God who exists necessarily. God is self-contained. Then anything that exists must come from the resources within that God. So if there is no distinction within that God, then anything that comes out of that God must not have distinction, because God would have to go outside of himself in order to come up with distinction or to create distinction. Otherwise, where is he getting that idea from?
Yeah, he could get it from himself if he's a universal mind. Like what is the actual contradiction between a universal mind creating all material?
Because material has distinction, as do the laws of logic, and so forth.
Yeah, so what? Like, I would say I would just keep pushing back. Like, what would distinction do? So distinction can exist. Okay, his basic point is that if God is one, how can distinction exist? But God can have multiple thoughts that are distinct, right? But he's saying no, distinction has to be grounded in reality. Not everything in reality represents the very essence of God. Not everything is grounded in the very essence of God in order for a thing to exist. So I understand where he's going, but it doesn't create a formal contradiction. He could say, "Oh, look, I can explain more things than you," but I don't.
For a Unitarian God who has no distinction, he would have to go outside of himself in order to produce distinction.
I don't think. Okay, so I don't. Are you saying there's a formal contradiction between pluralism, like let's say, pluralistic thing between material and immaterial, that contradicts a Unitarian or a universal mind? Are you saying that there's an actual contradiction?
Let me express what I'm saying, and you tell me if that's what I'm saying.
Sure.
Any God who creates, because the Bible says that God's eternal power and divine nature have been.
We can't assume the Bible, but yeah, go ahead.
I think we can. I think we. But again, that's why I wanted to find out your epistemological foundation.
Sure.
Like, how did you know this? How do you know this? And you're saying you assume it for the sake of argument, but Christianity is not merely a bare proposition about the nature of God. It comes with revelation. It comes with self manifestation or self revelation, such that men are without excuse. So I've got a whole host of questions for the Unitarian. How do you know? Where did this knowledge about God come from? You're saying you just presuppose it, but you're presupposing a very narrow metaphysical claim. And my question is, and we can bracket that question off for right now, but again, my question would still be, how does and I know, listen, this is something I wrestled with for a long time. I think I finally got it though. How does a Unitarian God or a monad, an absolute oneness, come up with this idea of distinction? It can only come from within him, but he has no distinction. Are you saying that God has something in his mind? If this is a universal mind, and there is no distinction in that mind, but there is distinction in that mind. That's a contradiction.
You're basically saying, how can pluralism exist in a monad? Yeah, because God's mind exists, but God's mind doesn't have to be the only thing that exists. For example, God can have multiple attributes, right? He can have holiness and love, and those are distinct. Even though they are one with him, they can still exist. This is not a formal contradiction. Like, this is not anything that's a actual formal contradiction that one mind cannot produce distinction. One mind, we all have one mind, and we produce distinction all the time. And so one mind can produce distinction. It doesn't need to ground it in anything else.
I'm saying distinction. Right? I'm not saying pluralism.
Pluralism just means multiple realities, and that doesn't formally contradict anything about that. God can just come up with a concept of a creation that is not him, right? So that doesn't formally. I could just say that doesn't formally contradict the mind of a monad. So right. So I can just move on from that.
Well, you can attempt to, but think about
But
what you're
okay,
positing.
let's
real quick.
just
No,
ask
hold
you-
on. I
okay,
want to respond.
Let
to
me
that.
ask you a question. Okay.
The God that you're positing has no distinction in his mind, and yet he
Oh,
has
the Trinity
distinction.
doesn't
Wait a
have
minute.
distinction.
Hold on.
Go
Hold
ahead.
on.
Sorry.
Hold on. This God has no distinction in his mind. He's the universal mind. He has no distinction, and yet he creates using his mind, using only his own aseity. He creates distinction. He would have to create that from something outside of himself because there is no distinction in that mind. That's a contradiction. Because now God,
okay.
because listen very carefully,
Yeah.
God has no distinction in his mind, and God does have distinction in his mind. That's a contradiction.
There's no distinction in the triune God's mind either. There's one distinction because mind is attributed to nature. So there's one divine nature. There's no distinction in the triune God mind.
There's no if God is simple, then, and I hold that he is.
Yeah. So this is also something that we brought up later, but like in the divine essence, there's only one divine mind. There's not two divine minds. The Father and the Son share one mind, one will.
Then God's nature and his mind are inseparable. God does not create using resources outside of himself. So when God creates man in his image, that's a reflection of what the Father and the Son have already exhibited since time immemorial, since eternity. When God creates, it's an expression of himself. That's why even sin is just simply the negation of God's goodness. Sin does not, and evil does not have its own existence where it comes from something outside the world or outside the decree of God, because sin is the negation of God. So, but for God to create plurality and diversity within himself, you're going to have to explain how a monad grounds diversity. This is the problem of the one of the many, as I'm sure you're familiar with.
Let me
And
push
a
back.
Unitarian God does not ground.
Let me push back. I'll answer the question, but let me also push back. I don't need a formal distinction in a monad. Second of all, how many wills?
Why?
How many wills does the triune God have? I'm
Wait a
saying
minute.
you have this. You have the same problem too.
Why don't you need that distinction?
Because he could come up with thoughts in and of himself that are not him.
Are those thoughts against his own nature?
No.
Okay,
They're
then he
one
can't
with his
have
nature,
distinction.
but like, yeah, I would take conflict with the word against. Like, what do you mean by against? Is it number 2 against the number 1? Is it number 3? So on forth. So he's trying to make it like if God has 3 thoughts, that must mean it's against the fact that God is 1. So how can 3 exist when God is only 1? I could just say universal mind is infinite, and therefore God can have infinite thoughts. Like, right? Like he's almost saying like God is 1, meaning like there's only one, only the number 1 exists, and that's not true. If God is himself, he doesn't need an extra. He could come with a thought that says there's a thing that exists, not me.
If that, you just said no when I asked you, is that thought against his nature?
No, all thoughts are consistent with God's nature.
Right. So diversity can't exist in the mind of a God who does not have diversity within himself. How could he possibly? How could a God who is an absolute oneness, a tawhid, a monad, how could that God possibly conceptualize diversity? And you want to say, well, but he does, because look, there's diversity in the world. But that's just the point. There's diversity in the world because it's grounded by the God who has diversity within himself, who has plurality within himself. That's the argument.
Okay, let me push back. How many minds and wills does a triune God have?
God has one will.
Okay,
we can
God has
talk
one
about his
will,
revealed will
which-
versus his hidden will.
Right, which would imply one mind.
Yeah, we can talk about the mind of God. Sure. We
Okay,
can also
so
talk,
you have
wait,
one
real quick.
mind.
Hold on. Let me
Oh,
finish.
sorry.
We can also talk about the mind of Christ, and we can also talk about Jesus Christ only doing what the Father has commanded him to do. So there is still, even within the mind or the reasoning of God, there is still distinction within there.
Mm-hmm. So my God in the monad has one mind, one will. You have one mind, one will in the divine essence until Christ takes on flesh. So we both have a God with one mind and one will.
I don't know.
No, yes, all Protestants do. We have one mind, one will. This is not a debated topic. So this is the fact that mind and will are attributed to nature. So we don't have more than one mind and one will in our view of God.
Well, hold on. Did you hear what I just said about how there is distinction?
Yeah, no,
within the
I
triune
see
God?
what you're saying. You're saying that in order to come
man,
up
I
with
really
distinction-
wish you would not, let me finish my sentence.
Oh,
I'm trying
I'm
not to
sorry.
ramble, but I do want to finish my thought. There is distinction. There's distinction within God. So it's part of God's nature. It's essential to God that there is distinction. So when God creates, he can create something that is distinct. He can create a reality that has distinction within it because he himself has distinction within his nature, within his essence. So that's what we mean. So the monad or the monadic God has no distinction within himself. So it's nonsensical to say that he creates distinction. That distinction does not come from his own nature. You said yourself, God can't have a thought that goes against his own nature. So God,
he can have distinctions by attribute, not by he can have an attribute that's distinct. He can have, I don't know, he can have love and he can have holiness, and those are two distinct attributes, and it can be attributed to nature. That's fine. That's not a contradiction.
God can't think about creating something and actualize that creation if it goes against his essential nature, which in your view is monadic in this hypothetical thought experiment.
Yeah, you're saying that in order for, let me just repeat it just so I understand. You're saying in order for God to create creation, he himself needs to be multi-personal prior to creation.
If that creation is going to have diversity within itself, yes, of course.
Okay. I don't think that's a formal contradiction to a monad.
I
don't see a formal
think
contradiction.
The formal contradiction is
Sorry about that.
the formal contradiction is entailed by Unitarianism. Unitarianism requires God to, and
Hopefully your stream went well. We just reviewed the Jay Dyer Gnostic informant debate, and I kind of give it like a 5 or 6 out of 10 in terms of substance. They were mostly arguing about stuff, and they were arguing about all kinds of different stuff, HSS. But I'm just kind of replaying this so that I'm about to wrap up too, but I'm just kind of replaying this so that I'm kind of smoothing out the conversation I had with Joel, because I want us to be making better arguments. I still don't think there's any formal contradiction that was created. And so I'm just trying to, I'll wrap up in a few minutes here too.
God's not creating using his thoughts, which I don't think anyone would ever say that. God would have to think about distinction in order to create it.
I'll have to rewind your tape and watch it, HHS, soon.
But God can only think about what he has within himself. God can only think about the kinds of things that he has within himself. That's why I say creation, when God creates different kinds of animals, as we see in Genesis 1, or when God creates man in his image, and then God creates male and female, there's distinction there. And then when Adam has a son named Seth, Seth is a reflection of his father in an analogous way, I should say, to how
the place where I think this would break down is that I can just easily say God's essence is infinite. It is one in the nature, in the sense that it is identically, by identity it's one, but by its composition it's infinite, right? So I don't need, just like how the Trinity has 3 persons and 1 being, I can say God's essence is infinite. That's how we say 3 persons and 1 being is, so I don't think this again creates that problem, like how it's being presented.
the son is a reflection of the father. All of this makes perfect sense within Trinitarianism, but given Unitarianism, God has no distinction. So now you've got to account for diversity and plurality outside of the mind of God, or separate from the mind of God, because God does not have distinction in his mind. There is no concept of distinction in a monadic God's mind, unless he's getting it from somewhere outside of himself.
Okay, could you at least say that I could ground the laws of logic in a monadic God?
No.
So I can't even ground if the laws of logic reflect the mind of God, I couldn't even ground the laws of logic in monadic God?
That's correct. That's exactly correct, yes.
But the laws of logic are grounded necessarily in the mind of God, even in both of our systems.
Well, he is a specific God, though.
Right, and that's the claim. But what the whole point is that the laws of logic, which have distinction between one another and yet are inseparable and are equally ultimate, presuppose the specific triune God of the Bible. That's the exact argument. And you can say, oh no, in my system, logic is grounded in God as well, but you're going to have to demonstrate how a Unitarian God grounds 3 laws of logic.
Yeah. I think I understand what you're saying. I would just push back and say I don't think there's a formal contradiction there, because you're basically saying that God cannot create distinction. But when the Father subsists the Son, for example,
I'm saying your God, your hypothetical God can't.
I'm saying even in the Trinity, when the Father subsists the Son, the Father at one point subsists off of the essence. He creates distinction in the essence.
No.
Point. Yeah, I probably should have said at one point. I know what I was thinking, but that's the choice of words there was not good.
That's you're very close to Arianism. You said at one point. There was never a time when the Son was not. That distinction has always been there. It's essential to God. So we do not believe that the distinction arose at some point, as you just put it. That's not biblical Christianity. That's Arianism. That's an old heresy. The distinction did not arise at some point. It's essential to who God is. To be very clear, diversity or plurality is not derivative of God's unity. They're both equally ultimate to one another.
Okay. Alex, if there's someone else, I don't want to take up all the time, by the way.
I wanted to, because I kind of have an issue with the way you made your first statement. You said that basically, if I understand correctly, your contention is that the Christian God is not the necessary precondition for intelligibility or for the laws of logic, for example. And then you said, because I can make the same argument with the deistic God. Are you saying then that the deistic God is a necessary precondition for the laws of logic?
Yeah, this type of reasoning now, which is what is the necessary precondition of logic, is not a helpful way to, I think, argue. Now, this is my opinion. Nobody else has to follow it. But if you just follow it, like, what do you need to ground the laws of logic? You need a universal mind to ground the laws of logic. No. But you need the whole Trinity to ground the laws of logic. Like, most people are like, why do I need the rest of it? Right? Like, you know what I mean? Why do I need all parts of the Trinity to ground the laws of logic? Right? So anyway, that's they will go down this route. Even if let's say hypothetically, I can give in and say, oh yeah, you're exactly right. You still have the problem of people having this misunderstanding of like, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, it's a hard argument to follow. In Occam Razor way, yes.
Well, so that's the thing is the same argument with the deistic God. Are you saying then that the deistic God is the necessary precondition for the laws of logic?
In an Occam Razor way, yes.
Well, so that's the thing is, let's say you had a deistic God with the minimal necessary attributes to ground the laws of logic, right? That's what you're saying? Then I would say, well, could a different deistic God with one more attribute that's not necessary also ground those laws of logic?
Yep.
So then your argument wouldn't be that this minimal attribute deistic God is the necessary precondition for the laws of logic.
Well, there's necessary and sufficient, right? Like, so you can ground the laws of logic in a universal mind, in a monad, sufficiently. You don't need to add an extra thing in there. They're going to go for essentially a maximalist view and saying you need all of it. And now this creates infinite different renderings of God that all become necessary in order to ground the laws of logic. And that's, again, a bad way to argue, right? Because what is the Eastern Orthodox person going to say? Well, unless you have the essence energy distinction, you worship a different God. So now it's like, your God versus my God, rather than just assuming the Trinity is one God, right? You know what I mean? Every attribute you add to God is a different God, literally a different being of God, in the way they're talking about it. If you boil it down to the minimal required attributes, all you need is universe. I think you should highlight why this is problematic based on the perspective of other religions you've dealt with and the objections you've heard. Yeah. My basic thing is that if I take the minimal, I've spent years on tag, the minimal amount of things that you need to ground the laws of logic in anything is a universal mind, is the mind of God, right? The essence of the mind of God. And multiple religions claim this. So like Islam, for example, claim this. And Islam can ground the laws of logic in their God, right? So Hindus can ground the laws of logic under Brahma. And and Christians obviously can. And then, the EOs literally say, you guys, because of essence energy and other things, they believe they have a different God, right? So they can ground it on their rendering of God and our rendering of God. So now it's multiple religions making identical claims. And so what people who follow tag after that say is, oh, okay, but Islam is internally contradictory. Okay, but that's a whole other argument now you have to make. Now you have to go to, Islamic dilemma and all these other evidential quote unquote arguments. You can't use tag anymore. Tag is, you know what I mean, only effective until it gets you to another religion who can claim a god. Once that religion can claim a god, now you have to find out you have to do the rest of the work anyway. You have to do the, Islamic dilemma, you have to do this and you have to do that. Then, anyway, so and that's what Seitan Brugengate does. Seitan Brugengate, if you go to I believe proofthatgodexists.com, if you claim to be a Muslim, he'll say, oh, Muslims believe in the Bible, and because the Bible is true, Islam can't be true. Like he'll make that argument because, yeah, so that's the problem. Is like multiple religions can claim tag, and they can all ground the laws of logic. And I think Joel will disagree with me, but this is not a contended fact about tag. Yeah, multiple religions can do that. So mind,
right? And you're saying, I think you're just splitting tag, and you're getting the first part right, because I mean, Jay Dyer, a lot of people consider him one of the top proponents of tag. Even he says, so like he's against Calvinism, but what he would say is that a Calvinist can use tag to a certain point. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at here. But what I'm trying to say is that,
And just to compare, like, think about the potency of just saying, like, if you're talking to an atheist, like, we could just say, first cause, where did the universe come from? The universe has to have a necessary cause. God is the one that created, and then you could just move on to, then who is this God? You can just move on to the rest of the evidential arguments. But tag is so convoluted in some of the way that it reasons there, which is a problem that I see.
the argument for
I'm sorry, I didn't
tag.
hear that. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
No worries.
What'd you say?
So Jay Dyer, a lot of people consider him a top proponent of tag.
Mhm.
He's against Calvinism. He's an Eastern Orthodox, but he would even say, because obviously there are a ton of Reformed presuppositional apologists.
Like Joel.
Well, yeah, and that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
And so that's what he would say, is that they can use it to a point. And the distinction he makes is the essence energies distinction. That's how he believes he can ground it in specifically Eastern Orthodoxy. So, but what I'm saying is, the argument for tag is that God, the Christian God, is a necessary precondition. So what that would mean is that if the argument is true, a hypothetical Christian God with one more attribute that God doesn't have, or something like that, would not be the necessary precondition for these laws of logic.
You see what he just said there? If I add an extra attribute to God, now it's a completely new rendering of God. But then there's no value to adding extra attributes to God if it's not helping you just ground the laws of logic. Like, why would you add love, for example, to God if all you're trying to do is ground the laws of logic, right? So again, it just makes it into a convoluted type of thing. It can be done very effectively. You just have to be very clear and guide and dog walk someone through this.
So when you turn around and you say the deistic God with minimal attributes needed to ground the laws of logic is the necessary precondition, then you would also have to say that a hypothetical deistic God with one more attribute than these minimal attributes cannot. But that doesn't seem like what you're saying. So it's not a mirror of tag.
So, if you, like, for example, if you boil it down to Jay's model and maybe Joel's model, which would be, Joel would be, say, he's assuming divine simplicity, Jay is saying essence energy. Is essence energy an absolute requirement to ground the laws of logic? That's where I'm coming from. And I would say no, but Jay would say yes, you absolutely need essence energy in order to ground it. And
yeah,
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I'm just saying it's different than Joel's argument, because Joel's argument, and Joel's using the laws of logic to show this problem with the Unitarian God. But
I don't want to take up too much of you guys' time, by the way.
No, it's okay.
It's a fun conversation.
It is. It is. And listen, I hear what you're saying, and I think that traditionally, even Reformed presuppositionalists, which many would say that those two are inseparable, I happen to agree, don't talk enough about why it has to be specifically the triune God of Scripture. They sort of take it for granted. And so what a lot of my work is dedicated to is showing why it must be the triune God of Scripture. And that does, this is what I was talking about with the previous debater, is that is bound up with the idea that logic, there are three laws and they are distinct from one another while being inseparable. All of them are necessary, meaning they exist in all possible worlds. What that means is that you cannot posit a world in which the necessary grounding for, or let me say this, you cannot posit a world in which the grounding for logic is not triune. Now,
you technically can. You technically can posit a world. Like I said, when you have paracontra logic, when you say something like this statement is false, you can technically posit worlds in which, for example, you don't need the law of excluded middle. And second of all, how do I put this? You can make worlds, and it's weird to think like this. I'm gonna get a little bit woozy about this, but you could posit a world in which even the other laws of logic don't always exist in the same way. So, for example, when you look at like light, this is a common one. Light is a wave. The proposition of light is a wave is true and not true, right? Depending on the content of discourse. Light is a wave, and light is also not a wave. There's multiple realities that could be true. So the thing is, like, are these laws the kind of things that is it a property of the universe? And I would say, I don't know. it's hard to think like that, because now we're saying that we're saying that every single multiverse has to follow our laws of logic identically. And I mean, heck, I could even propose like a couple of three. I've thought about it. Like I could propose a few worlds that don't need excluded middle, for example, right? I could propose that, or even non-contradiction. I could propose the same kind of thing. And yeah, but I understand what they're saying. You need, if you, since we have the laws of logic, and since these things seem like an universal, we definitely need them grounded. And there's no universe that can exist without the laws of logic. That's the claim they're making. But I believe it was Graham Smith. I forgot his name. Graham something. He's a logician that tries to say that excluded middle doesn't always apply. I don't know. It was just a fun conversation.
If the Unitarian God is the necessary grounding for logic, then the triune God is not the grounding for logic in any possible world. That follows, because, and now what you've done is you've actually, if that were to hold, which it doesn't, you would have disproven Christianity at that point. You would have disproven the Trinity, because there cannot be more than one necessary precondition for something. If there is, this is what Alex is getting at, I think. If there is, then neither one of them is necessary, because one.
Why is there no more than one necessary precondition or something? Logic itself isn't logic necessitated by all the laws of logic? So if the laws of logic are three and they're distinct, like, are they not necessitated by three things? I don't think that statement is true. Yeah, I don't know. It's too late, but I would not think that statement is true. Why would you only need one precondition, necessary precondition? You could have multiple necessary preconditions.
One of them could be eliminated and the other one would still stand, in which case, if that's true of both of them could be eliminated. They're not necessary. So if the Unitarian God is, in your hypothetical situation or in any possible world, the necessary grounding for logic, then the triune God cannot be the necessary grounding for logic, which means he just does not ground logic, because in every possible world, it's the Unitarian God. So unless you're a Unitarian, you don't want to make that argument. Not only does it not hold, but now you've actually debunked Trinitarian Christianity. Okay.
I mean, I guess my if I was thinking about, because this is not an argument I made up, this is an argument that I actually brought up to a deist. If you boil down God to a set of attributes, and then you say, because tag is formulated as, what do you need to ground the laws of logic? And if you boil down the minimal set of attributes that you need to, I guess the confusion would be, why do I need the entire kit and caboodle when I can just pick, the minimal? Yeah, okay, like, I hate to say, okay, so why can't I just pick the Father and the Son, and without the Spirit then? Why can't I have a dyad like the EOs always claim we do? I could just have a dyad, and now I have distinction. So now I can ground all the laws of logic, because now I have distinction. Or do I need threeness to ground distinction? That would be a silly case if I don't think Joel will make the case. But now I could just say, the Father and Son are just enough to ground the laws of logic. Like I said, there's so many, I would say, potholes in this dog walking scenario that I try not to use DAG. Almost set of attributes, which is just universal mind, universal personal mind is all I need. I understand what you're saying. No, I understand. What you're saying. Yeah.
No, I get that. That's the contention, but upon evaluation, we see, no, you don't. It's not just some bare theistic universal mind. Setting aside the fact that there's no revelation that authenticates that. Scripture is self-authenticating and it is from God. So, like, we're not going to actually set aside Scripture, but for the sake of argument, this is the argument, which is that logic requires, it presupposes the triune God of Scripture, such that if it's not the triune God, then you are left without a grounding for logic. And if the Unitarian God is the necessary ground for logic, then that means he grounds logic, or it grounds logic, in all possible worlds, including the possible world that you and I live in, where we believe in the triune God.
There's a distinction with an individual. Yeah, right. There's a distinction anyway. Yeah. I do you know if Joel is still working through this argument, or is he kind of like settled as this is the way to do it? Because this is one of the things, and this is where I think it's a bit unhealthy. My personal opinion is tag becomes this, like, not just a helpful tool, but it becomes you have to use this. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of Reform people, for some reason, think like you have to use it's like biblical to use tag, and like I don't know where they get that from, but they just start to say, well, We can't possibly give evidence to people because that's unbiblical. That would make the atheist the judge. And so tag becomes like almost this, you need to use tag. Otherwise, you're doing something unbiblical. I know Dr. James White is a huge precept guy, and he loves to say stuff like that. I'm like, no, that's ridiculous. The Bible constantly gives evidences to people and things like that for all kinds of stuff. So I don't think that that's true. But yeah, in the Reform community, that they made this into a theological doctrine. You know what I mean? Does God have distinct thoughts, emotions, prayer? Yeah, that's what I said. I could just say, well, the universal mind is infinite, and infinite meaning it could render, it could, like, the idea that it can't, like, the universal mind cannot render multiple thoughts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 thoughts. That's not a that's not a thing that exists, right? Yeah, so you could just ground it with, yeah. That's where it becomes unhealthy. It becomes unhealthy where you have to use tag. You know what I mean? And a lot of people do make it seem like that.
Because there just simply cannot be definitionally two necessary groundings for logic or two necessary presuppositions. So yeah, you
competing.
Yeah.
What did I say?
Well, because you can have multiple necessary preconditions.
I did send this to someone, and the first thing they said is there's a misunderstanding between what's necessary and sufficient. The thing we're debating is sufficient. Necessary is a whole other thing that we don't need to talk about. Sufficient, you only need a universal mind sufficiently to ground the laws of logic. So that's what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah. You're right. Yes. Sorry. Two contradictory. Yeah, because if the triune God is there, and he is, then the Unitarian God is not. So those are contradictory worldviews.
The necessary thing is, in this case, mind. The sufficient one would be like the mind, the universality of that mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. I don't want to, again, like I said, take a
it was a good conversation.
Very good conversation. I really appreciate that pushback because this is an argument that I've been formulating for like 3 years. So I always appreciate a chance to be able to articulate and defend it big time.
Okay. Thank you. I'll be in the back.
So much, Z.
Appreciate it. God bless.
All right.
Wait, is it Z, or how do you say it? You know him, right, Twitchy?
I say Zons.
Zons.
Yeah, me and Zons are tight. He's helping me out with some arguments and stuff, and he's been on my channel a few times. Good guy. Real good.
Seems like a good dude.
Hey, we should give another plug because there's new people who are watching now.
Yeah.
Twitchy, where I don't know which way to point.
Yeah, like I said, tag can be good. If you guys have mastered tag, it can be good. I spent a lot of years thinking about tag, and honestly gave me a little bit of a doozy when I was first learning it. And then when I learned it, I was like, no one's going to understand this. Who understands? To be honest, who really actually understands tag? Maybe like Greg Bonson understands it, and Van Til understands it. And yeah, Dr. White probably understands it, but like the fullest extent, yeah, it takes like a PhD to understand tag, man. And so that's why. So Twitchy has a couple of upcoming debates, and related to I forgot the topic. Dang it. It's like 3:00, so I forgot the topic of what he's no, not his upcoming Unitarian arguments. He has an upcoming debate. He has a couple of upcoming debates with something else. I forgot what it was. The topic was. I forgot what the topic was. If you're still awake, and yeah, so he reached out for some help, and I'm helping him. So yeah. Anyway, basically, tag is a very confusing argument. It requires too much philosophy, and then the laws of logic, for example, like something like you need to ground the laws of logic. It's not a thing that's, I would say, create urgency in people, right? It like there's the argument of stuff, and original central depravity. That's what it is. Yeah, original central depravity. I actually think it's just original sin at this point now. That's what we're working on. So the laws of logic themselves, like, okay, look, if I'm going to go proclaim the gospel to someone, like that, let's just say I'm trying to preach the gospel. I don't know about other people, but I'm just trying to get to the gospel as fast as possible. Like all the arguments is just, let's just get to the gospel as fast as possible. If I'm like sitting there and talking to the atheist about, hey man, like, you need to ground the laws of logic, you know what I mean? There's no like natural segue there. So there's a little bit of like, urgency in giving the gospel to people. You know what I mean? And creating something in them so that, they need to say, I need a savior. Tag just, man, like it just doesn't hit home a lot. Now, if I'm in an actual debate with an atheist and I'm sitting there and just having fun and, trying to like battle it out gladiator mode, yeah, maybe I'll bring out tag. But yeah, like if I'm trying to share the gospel, like, yeah. I think it's the 28th, I want to say. I think it's the 28th. Yeah. So yeah, basically tag, that's a problem I see with tag, is the fact that I want to get to the gospel. I don't want a bunch of like philosophy mumbo jumbo in a gospel conversation. If you're bringing up something like the laws of logic or ontology, like you probably have gone wrong somewhere. That's just my personal opinion. You've just gone wrong somewhere. So anyway, that's the problem I see with tag in general. And I've seen a lot of debates with tag, and they just all end up with, how do you know anything? How can you know anything? It's a vicious circle and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, just you just preach Christ crucified and move on. You know what I mean? Hey, brother, listen, the universe can't exist. Nothing can exist without God. That's the first chapter of Genesis. Let me tell you about this God, right? That's it. You know what I mean? That's what I feel like. One of the problem of evil, in my personal opinion, Western Christianity struggles with this. I typically have not really. It's usually a red herring when someone is going to bring up the problem of evil, because when they're bringing up a problem of evil, in some sense, it's not about the logical argument of evil. It's not like, oh, evil can exist or God can exist. That's not. There's a logical argument of evil, but then I feel like most people who bring up the problem of evil are, struggling with something. You know what I mean? Like it could be something like, and what I've seen examples of is slavery. How can God allow slavery in the Bible? Or how could God allow this one event to happen, or a natural disaster, or or war? Had a lot of people who had to leave Iraq and they emigrated to United States, and they, would have issues with, how could God, like, I've seen so much suffering in the world. And so I've found that problem of evil in an evangelistic context be more ministerial, more about the heart, than be about the logical problem of evil. Um, typically I've said that um, God creates purpose out of evil. So um, when man has willed, what God said, like when man has willed to evil, right? God allows it, but he always redeems it for a purpose. There's always a purpose for evil. And so um, we don't know what the purpose always is in our lifetime. We just don't. But we do know that God has a purpose for every single thing, and He will bring every single evil act to justice. So that's what I say. I don't usually address it head on, because most people are not thinking about it like a syllogism, a logical argument. How does the East address this? I'm actually kind of curious. Is there a better Eastern answer than the Western Christianity? Western Christianity typically just says, you know, essentially evil is a result of free will and, man's defect, and, God allows it, and he's going to redeem man. That's pretty much what they're going to say. But I don't know if there's a better Eastern answer. Yeah, I think that's going to be pretty soon. And we're just working on some arguments because church history and stuff like that. I think Idol Killer is a little bit strong on church history. So Twitchy knows grammar. Uh, read Dostoevsky. Yeah, right. Um, yeah, I don't know. Like, I feel like there's evangelism urgency where tag is just absolutely useless. To be completely honest with you guys, evangelistic urgency, I'm not gonna sit there and preach tag, but for, an actual debate, yeah, maybe, you know. Okay, I will read Dostoevsky for um uh on the problem of evil. So yeah, I think Western Christianity sees, generally speaking, more of the um more of the fact that it's a result of free will and God is redeeming mankind. That's usually how they answer. And I have no problem answering that way. God allows free action for his purposes. Um is Dostoevsky, I know I'm butchering it, is like about the struggle, the necessity of struggle and things like that and overcoming. Is that related? I'll read it later. I'll read it later. Um I would say yes to the problem of evil. We would likely include Christ's suffering to say that something like we have a God who's familiar and went through evil and suffering. I once had this young lady preaching. I was preaching the gospel in a university, and we would do like open air preaching. So we would do open air preaching, and this one young lady, I remember her. She walked up and she asked a question. Hey, my uncle, you know, did things to me from age 6 to about age 12. Like my uncle did stuff to me. Where does that fit into God's plan? I still remember that. Like it's like imprinted in my head. Like everything about that day is imprinted in my head because I remember that girl would just, she started to cry. She didn't know what to say. She just started shaking. Um, so, some of that is just ministerial. She's not looking for an logical argument. So, she's trying to make sense of the suffering, right? And sometimes all we could do is, I feel like, just weep with those who weep. There's nothing else we can do other than offer Christ and weep with her, and that's what we did. We didn't sit there and address any logical arguments or some sort of a fallacy. We just kind of quieted down. We prayed for her. Um, but yeah, like a lot of times when people bring up this logical argument of evil, I feel like it's okay. I will watch. I will read it. I will read it. I don't mind reading. But yeah, like I feel like a lot of people are just struggling with this problem of evil because of that. And you also thank you, brother. Uh, so the other thing is, um, I think I've also realized that sometimes you just don't have satisfactory answers for people, right? Like if you've lost a loved one, all you could say is, yeah, you might meet them at some point. We don't know, and it's up to God. God is always loving and merciful. That's all you can say. Unfortunately, the nature of life is like that. So yeah, all that to say, yeah, tag. Listen, if you guys are gonna use tag, just make sure it's not my only kind of encouragement is make sure it doesn't derail. If you notice yourself 5-10 minutes just talking about philosophy for too long, just say, all right, let's move on to the gospel or something like that. You know what I mean? I think it's just not worth getting someone to admit the logical absolute stuff. That's just my opinion. I mean, you guys might have a different opinion. Um oh wow. Okay. Okay. All right. I will definitely take a look. Um Okay. So thank you so much, guys. It's been a long night. I wanted to hang out with you guys for a little bit. I will be taking a break this Lent season, reflecting more on Christ. But I wanted to cover this debate because I thought it would be a good one, just to cover it with you guys. I do appreciate you guys. I love you guys. If you guys are watch the Alex Soren debate, that was a good one. Go and watch the Alex Soren, Aaron Gallagher one, just for funs on apostolic succession. It's a good debate, worth watching. Focus on the cross X. Cross X is where I think the meat was laid out. So go watch the cross X and then see, um, what where you agreed on or disagreed on. What's funny is that I was talking to an Iranian guy and he actually was he was actually an atheist, and his reason was a problem. I randomly clicked on the stream. Uh, oh yeah, okay. Interesting. Um, Interesting. So, yeah. So again, this Lent season, even if you're a person who doesn't celebrate Lent, that's fine. It's a good time to just reflect on the Lord, nonetheless. So, I do appreciate you guys, love you guys, and we will see you soon. God bless.